Saturday, February the 22nd, 2020. Thank you all for being here. I think it's some exciting times to share. At this point, I will just hand this over to our city manager and layperson, and let's go to work.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council, and thank you, everybody, for taking time out of a weekend to be with us. We've done this annually, at least since I've been here, and it's always been one of the more productive work sessions where we can get out of the weekly, bi-weekly matters immediately in front of us and look to a longer range for the community and the vision that we're trying to set. So this is a very valuable time. It's one of our actually favorite times. A lot of work to get to this point, but the product that comes out of this is very, very useful for us. So we're really setting the stage for upcoming budget processes. As you've seen, we reference this meeting throughout the year, and this gives us an opportunity to get some feedback and some consensus about a range of topics that have this longer range impact. So the council's had these binders for the better part of a couple weeks to go through, and there's a lot of material in there. In the binders, there's some preliminary, and in the folders, some financial information, some projections with the best information that we have right now that's updated. There's projections for rollback and the what they used to call the effective tax rate. So those assumptions are all described in there, and that's a good reference in the inside front cover. I'd suggest that you spend some time with you if you haven't already. The tax rates themselves are very formulatic, and you know, those are more for reference. I wouldn't get too hung up on those individual sheets. And then there's a list of the white papers. And something that we've used in the past, and we've got a hard copy in front of you. This is the long sheet, the legal sized. So each one of the white papers has a summary of the high points of that. And then there's questions in green that I'm going to use to try to tease out some of the key questions, salient things that we're trying to get out of the council, in addition to any questions you might have on the content itself. And the book is organized with these white papers. There's a future staffing, which we are going to go over. There's a prior year updates from last year's work, just to close the loop on that. We don't spend a lot of time on that today. It's more for reference. So there's a lot of good material in here. The nature of the meeting today, just to keep things moving in large part, I'm going to do the narration and moderation to keep the meeting moving along. But really, it's the staff in the room, many of whom are here with you. They wanted to hear it firsthand. They're the ones that did the work. So I want to thank and acknowledge all the staff that are here. That's the majority of the room, actually. They did a ton of great work. You see their names on the papers individually. They care about the community and this organization, and they put a lot of thought and work into this material so that you have it before you this morning, I'm sorry.
Okay, let's proceed with review of process and objectives.
So those will be the objectives, and the process will be that we'll go through each of the white papers, and if council will allow, I'd like to jump in. The first one is on our fiscally responsible tab. That's tab 1 out of the book. And that's a paper that deals with our capital project investment financing overview. This is an overview of the means of financing our capital improvements. It's a point in our life cycle of the city that we have a substantial capital improvement program, about $500 million all told, that we're responsible for. We report on that every other month with the milestone report, our progress towards that. But paying for that comes from a variety of means. We try to leverage outside funds wherever possible, state and federal monies. We have enterprise funds, but a big chunk of that obviously is debt financing that's paid back over time, much like a business would do with their capital investments. And so we've got projections in there about future, and again, those are predicated on assumptions of tax growth and so forth. We've got summaries of the capital improvement program that include all those funding mechanisms, the tax rates, and then a variation of the milestone report in there. So we do have some specific proposals in there. We'd like to establish a separate enterprise fund debt service. Mr. McCarter and Cynthia Pearson can talk about that. But we strongly believe that that will enable the council and the staff to identify the debt portion of our enterprise function very clearly. It's also going to moderate some of the fluctuations when we refinance. It spikes up the fund and makes it hard to make comparisons. We do have a recommendation there to look at going to certificates of obligation instead of revenue bonds. That's got a lot of positives. Actually, somewhat surprisingly, we'll be able to get a lower interest rate. And it will also help us for some of that capital financing. And it'll also, everything but the TWDB financing, we won't be able to do it that way. And then we'd also like to move the MUD rebates to a separate fund, again, to identify that and make that more clear as we go forward. So all of that, those are the specific proposals. They're somewhat technical, but important. So we want to make sure that council's aware of that and has some consensus on that. The key questions that we have for these is getting feedback on our projections for the debt to AV ratio and the projected debt totals, and then confirm the changes in the accounting and the structural that I just mentioned for how we organize our funds for the upcoming year, if there's any questions about that. I should mention too that all the white book material, the white papers are online and available for anybody in addition to hard copies that the council's received. So with that, I'd ask if anybody has any questions on the papers themselves on this capital financing, and if we could start to get any feedback on the questions that I mentioned there that are in green on the papers before you.
Okay, let's move to the objective while we're here. White paper discussion by strategic priority. Let's start with the thing that's going to keep us going, and that is financial responsibility.
All right, so Mayor and Council, as I mentioned, the tab one, the one on the capital financing, be appropriate if there's any questions that Council has, just open it up for, entertain those now from you. So.
Ready to go?
Yes, sir.
Willie, let's start with you. I think you're the wakest of the bunch.
Mayor, and it just might be easier if people just want to jump in. I mean, member Owen said it sounded like you might have a question, so.
Okay.
All right, well, I'll jump in. So if I understand, if we go to the rollback, which we're capped at 3%, we're looking at less than $1 million in revenue total, like 945,000, if I read correctly. There's not not a big push to the budget if we adopt that. I think you and I've had this conversation before. Essentially, making sure that we as a council are providing good direction. I know it's been discussed a little bit ad nauseum over the last several years about our percentage of debt, or the percentage of the tax rate that goes to paying off debt. Right now, we're to our competitive set is we're much higher than they are. We're at 59%. I know that's dwindling down. Going to tick back up once the full throat of the 2019 bonds hit. What I'd like us to look at, starting with this budget session, if other council members are supportive of me, is what does it look like for our capital projects and our onboarding of staff over the next 5 years, maybe, if we prioritize paying off debt and try and reduce that that percentage of our tax rate to something under 50%. I don't want to take any hard turns. I don't want to just stop and take a 90-degree, go 90 degrees in a different direction. But I'd like to see, what would we be looking at if we set that as a priority? I know what that consequence generally would be. The projects that we have on the slate would not be able to get done. We'd have to delay them, at least the ones that are funded through the general fund, pausing some capital projects that weren't voter approved, things of that nature. But I'd like to at least see what that direction would look like. So if we do want to prioritize that, we do want to make sure that we're addressing that concern that continues to come up. We know what the consequences are. That way we don't do it blindly. I'm fine. I'm perfectly fine with the enterprise or setting aside a specific fund for the enterprise or in the enterprise fund for debt. How to be honest with you, is however y'all want to structure that, that makes it better for y'all, makes things more organized for y'all, gives us some advantages. To me, I'm fine. Generally it's pretty much all the same thing. The revenue's coming in, y'all organize it in different accounts, prioritize certain values for certain accounts, but um, uh, that level of detail is not as important to me. If y'all see an advantage in it, I'm supportive of it. I'm probably not going to be supportive of going to certificates of obligation. I know that there's an advantage there. I see what's in the write-up. I know me and at least one other council member here have had some consternation of continuing to use COs since it's non-voter approved. Particularly, we're hearing from the community, we're hearing from other council members about the debt level. I know it's manageable. I know it's not probably not as practical an issue as it is an issue with respect to making sure that we're focusing on what some of our citizens are concerned about, which is our debt load. So I think right now I want to stay the course with what we have and not adopt certificates of obligation as a primary tool for taking on debt in the enterprise fund. I'm perfectly fine for it being used when there's an emergency. If we have a big cost, something breaks at one of the plants and we have no other way of funding a significant repair job, and the COs are the best way to get the capital as quickly as possible. But I just don't want it to be I don't want it to be something that we go to initially. That's pretty much it in broad strokes. I know that the city's heading in the right direction. I know that there's things that we can improve upon. There's a lot of things that we need to do better, but I think we're on the right path. I appreciate all the effort that y'all put in to make this early budget session happen and get us all the information we need to be able to provide you direction.
Did you have any comments at this point?
There's other council members that want to weigh in on the structural changes, the accounting suggestions we made, and/or the financing. There was that sheet of the milestones that's been simplified from what you see every month on pages 17 and 18. That is designed to give you a flavor that if we wanted to look at projects to slow down, it's going to be harder to do these that are already in design, but future ones, that'd be the ones we look to if there was a desire to slow down on that project list. But
I will tell you, at least from my perspective, I've gone through these. I go through these pretty regularly. I have my own ideas, but I'd rather get y'all's suggestions about what y'all think we can pause, rather than kind of be dictatorial about it, because some of these may have more unintended consequences than I may be able to think of. If I just say, hey, look, let's just not do Fire Station 7. That may really have an impact to what Chief Riley has planned for the next several years that could drastically affect things beyond just the capital costs. So I would love to have an input session where we talk about the capital projects, where we are in each of the stages, and what we'd like to do in the future. But I'd rather get y'all suggestions first and react to it than try and tell y'all what I think we should and shouldn't prioritize. Doesn't have to be in my opinion, it doesn't have to be a whole lot of effort, just maybe categorizing things and saying, this is what we think we can pause. I don't want staff to put a whole lot of time into it. But I'd hate to just come on high and say, stop doing this without knowing what the consequences are.
Okay. Make sure that we don't mix fiscal responsibility with parks and so forth. Why don't we try to run through these separately, the 6 of these categories, and stick to fiscal responsibility at this point. And then otherwise we'll be mixing park swings with how we're doing our banking and so forth. So anybody else have a comment on this?
Yes, Mayor. Thank you.
Start with Dick Gary.
It's on page 16. This is basically the capital improvement plan. So it shows in 2030 that our debt rate will pretty much be cut in half almost. Taking on debt that we already know that we're going to do within the plan. So are we still on target for 2030 to be able to have our rate down to our tax rate down to 0.26525?
Great. Thanks for the question. So what you pulled out there, and that's highlighted in that gray bar, that shows the effect of when the TERS ends, and then all of that value, $3 billion now, comes back onto the normal tax roll. And so we put out the comparisons because it is a piece of information, but nobody else has a TERS that has that much money that takes it away from our ability to use it for debt service. And so we have a large capital improvement program that's necessary for this stage in our growth. And we have $3 billion in tax value that's off the books for debt service purposes. And so, yes, in 2030, with everything that's laid out there on that page, with the future issuances that have been approved with our capital improvement program, even with all of that, when that TERS comes on, the rate would be projected to drop in half, as you said. So the comparisons to other cities is sort of apples and oranges, because when that comes back, it'll be more equivalent to the situation that we have there.
Okay, thank you.
Menendez?
I just wanted to speak to the issuance of the COs. I mean, I didn't see too many negatives here for using the COs for the enterprise debt, but maybe if there's something that I'm missing here, I mean, it looks like there's a significant opportunity to have some cost savings using the COs. I mean, would there be something that I'm missing? You have these bullet points here, and the only thing that I really see is that we would have this opportunity, like you said, to explain the commitment of water and sewer revenue for the issuances for driving up the general obligation debt, but I don't really see a drawback, and I would hate to just say no because we're getting citizen feedback, but at the same time, it has a cost saving attached to it. I just feel like I don't really have
It's really semantics. I mean, it's the title of it. I mean, the positives are as described there financially, and I understand there's an optic to that, but I think that's part of our obligation to explain. You're saving money by doing it that way. It's going to be your call, but other places do issue them as that instrument, and it's the same effect. You're paying this. We'd be paying less by issuing them that method.
Yeah, I mean, these numbers, 1.83 million by 2024 using this methodology. I just don't. Yeah, I think that the optics probably just aren't enough to sway me to not say, okay, let's do this whenever there's cost saving attached to it. So that's my feedback on that. All right, thank you.
If I can jump in, I mean,
Councilman Little?
if I can jump in, Mayor, so the water and sewer, right now we're issuing revenue bonds, so those bonds are backed by the enterprise fund. So going to the COs, we get a lower rate because that's backed by the I guess good faith and credit of the city in total, not just the enterprise fund. So that's going to add more general debt. It's going to make us look worse from a rating agency, which they've essentially already put us on notice. And yes, we can put a footnote and explain that, but that's just another footnote. I mean, we already have to have a major footnote to explain the TERS and try to boost our credibility there. So I'm not a fan of that. And yeah, there is some savings we can squeeze out, but if we ever if we continue down the path and we do get a downward revision in our credit rating from Standard & Poor's or Moody's, then our overall debt rate's going to go up across the whole board, just so we could save a little bit off the COs. So I'm right now that I'm opposed to that. If everybody's adamant on moving forward, I think we need to get our financial advisors up here. We can have a more in-depth discussion, but that's the direction I'm leaning right now.
I would agree with that. If we do move that direction, then we need to have a full-throated discussion about what the limits are for the COs, similar to what we had with the general bond, so that we at least have guidance to staff of when we want them to use and not want them to use, as opposed to just complain when they are used. But I'm with Member Carbone. I just don't think that's a direction I want to head for the enterprise fund.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, long-term wise, our rating would go up and we're going to end up paying more in the long term. So I don't know. It might be a short savings, but long-term wise, it's going to cost us more.
I agree with that.
That's my little.
So if, I think if we're going to take on more debt, we need to put it to the citizens on a referendum. In discussions internally or with our bond council, as the subject of what would happen to the city's ability to service our debt, what would happen to it in the event we had another 2008 type downturn in the economy, where property values plummet, and along with that, so does the city's tax revenue. Does that ever come up?
So the projections that you see are, we make clear the assumptions for that, and they're conservative based on historical. I don't know that anybody, if there was a 2008 Great Recession again, everything would be on the table for the spending side and so forth. So that would be the main instrument to do with that. Just to go back a little bit, so we're talking enterprise funds, so that wouldn't be voter approved in any fashion. It's water and sewer, so that wouldn't be the case with that. And I would point out, if council wants us to continue with the revenue bonds, that's fine. Just wanted to point that out. This was developed in consult with the bond council, and they showed how this is done in other places. We can bring them back to explain further. But that piece on the top of page 7, the coverage requirements, I don't want to let that go without explaining that a little bit, that we would be able to reduce some of the money we just have in fund balance in the water sewer, which is significant for the debt coverage. And so we wouldn't have to be having a rate structure that has just cash sitting there that's extraordinary because of the coverage requirements. So that would also factor into that. That would be another advantage of going to the COs for that instrument.
Well, maybe we can move a step at a time. Maybe we can set up the debt service fund, get better organized with respect to prioritizing that through the enterprise fund, and then subsequent to that, once that stabilizes, then we can look at COs in the subsequent year, rather than making two substantial changes to how we're organizing and taking on debt in that fund all at once.
I mean, the elephant in the room is we can't bill correctly right now, so I don't know that I'm for wholesale changes in that area.
I'd say that's apples and oranges. I don't think that's necessarily
All rolls up in the same department.
fair enough. But with respect to the debt, I think maybe just take it a step at a time. Maybe we can revisit it next year once the debt service fund is established. The enterprise debt service fund is established. We get it better organized, and then we can look at COs.
I want to point out too on page 3 of that, that's you've seen that kind of graphic, but this one's a little bit different in that we show more future years out with the capital improvement program, with the 2019 bond issue, and with the interim TERS. You can see the debt to outstanding to value ratio declining for all these years, ticking up, as was, I think, we mentioned for next couple because of the TERS financing and the 2019, and then starting to decline again. So we keep a close eye on that. That's important for the ability to pay. It's been referenced, 5%, something that some of the rating agencies might look at as an indicator to look closer. And that's just one thing I think from a policy perspective, y'all want to keep an eye on. If it started to tick up and stay up, I think we'd want to look even harder at our capital improvement program, or if it deviated too much from this, that's another indicator for us.
I mean, when you combine that with the chart on page 16 that shows kind of that cliff when the TERS value comes back on, Is there, I know right now we're going with level principal debt service. I mean, does it make sense to look at going with restructuring how our bonds are to help manage that cliff? You know, right now it's everybody hold on tight. It's going to be painful for the next 10 years, and then we can breathe. And I don't know that that necessarily makes sense. When we look at other rates and other planning, we tend to try to smooth things out. So have we talked to bond counsel about that?
Not that I know specifically, we certainly can. We've been following what's been adopted for the policy of late. Obviously the flip side of that would be paying more interest costs and trying to avoid that with, restructuring. I think towards the way you're saying, but, and then it also, when we put to the voters in 2019, we had that level debt assumptions built into those, but could run scenarios that describe that and see if there'd be much of any savings versus the added interest costs.
Yeah, I'd be interested in seeing that.
Yeah. Woody, did you have some comments on this?
Well, I've got a few. Going through and looking at some of this, I feel the same way that other council members have on the COs to look at that. Going back through, I think we spent about $50 to $60 million on COs. And of course, it's been in the enterprise fund through there. But if we're at that point, on there, I think we need to come in and reestablish some of this stuff and look at it. In addition to that, I think on some of the things that we need to look at on the new projects and of coming out, I think we're at a point in time that we need to slow down a little bit. Just because we can look out in the future right now and see all these different things that are happening out there, and sure, we'll be able to pay the debt. And I'll take you back to 2007 when we had the bond issue there, and we thought we'd be able to pay everything out, in a period of time. And then 2008 and 2009 hit us when everything went south, and we was having a lot of homes on the west side that was coming up and foreclosures on, and we're just now going through some of the bond issue out of 2007 period of time, which I think is something we need to look at. Just because we look in the future right now, we say, okay, in the future, additional revenue is going to come in because we're going to be topped at 10 billion out there that can be taxable. I'm not too sure that we need to come out at this point in time and lay everything on the table. I think on some of the things that we're just, and I've got my own reasoning for it, and probably is not going to mention it here, but anyway, I think that what we're doing is doing too many things at one time, and incurring a lot of debt, certainly at one time. We're putting a load on the staff at one time, and then ultimately we need to get additional staff for things. And I think, we need to slow down and take a look at some of these, and we'll do that, I think. And what Trent Perez said, that we really need to go through them one at a time, not saying they're not important and we shouldn't do them, but look at the time frame when we can actually bring them on. One other thing, in the police and fire, we helped off on the areas that we're going to annex, and we've got the ESD set up in all of those. And I didn't see it in here, but is there anything letting us know when the ESDs and when we start collecting money on those?
Yeah, so that wouldn't factor into this section at all, because this is all capital financing. That'd be to operations. Those ESD payments are built into our operating revenue projections.
Okay, because at one point in time, we were providing those services out there based on what we had here, and not the additional money. But now with that, when they come in, we set up these ESDs in that area, and we're supposed to get X number of dollars out of the ESDs on a yearly basis to pay. So you're saying that what we're doing, we're calculating some of that money in on the police and fire for this next time?
It's in the operating revenues. It has nothing to do with that page, just so we're clear.
Right. Oh.
So in that financial summaries that I referenced, that's in the front cover, that shows up in these.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So we're saying that, are you saying through here that we're looking at the same rate this fiscal year as what we had last year?
So those have been updated. from what you saw in the multi-year during the budget process. So they're, basically steady, pretty consistent with what we'd seen then. It's just, there's so many big factors that change, and when we get the new valuations, we've got the revaluations until we start to get that information in July, August. That's when it starts to become clearer, unfortunately, right at the cusp of the budget. So best we know right now, yeah.
Okay. One other thing, and I didn't see it in here, but here recently, you sent out something to the council members on revenue not coming in the way that we anticipated, something like about $14 million on there. Yeah, it was in an email that was sent, and I don't know if it was just revenue that hadn't come in, the slow paying it or whatever. But
sorry, I can't remember which piece that was. It didn't ring a bell at all.
If I have time, I'll put it up for you. But and that was one of the things that we discussed previously when we was doing the other budget of people focusing on other things right now and not being able to get the dollar amount that we thought in at a timely manner on through there. So
I don't want to leave that on the table. Our big revenues for the general fund are property tax and sales tax, and both of those are humming at budget. Actually, property tax is a little bit high, and sales tax is right at budget. So from the revenue side, for operations in the general fund, there's no issues. I say no issues, no major
I don't know
deviations.
If I'll come up with a number then, but I'll find
it's a big number to come up with. So.
But, yeah, so that was a concern I had on it, and I think other council members brought up other concerns, but I think as far as the projects that we got on the capital projects, I think twofold. We need to come back and look at those, and do it in another setting of which ones that we really need to do. I'm sure that they're all very important projects to go on there, but I'm not too sure if they need to be done all at one time, and because we've seen now that we're not able to focus on all of them with the staff because of the number of projects. So we've be honest with you, there's a few that's come out that's ended up in we're doing projects or coming in looking at saving money, and one example was with TxDOT saying on the frontage road out there, and we spent some time and effort and money on that through there, and now 2 weeks ago we come back and we turned it back over to TxDOT and appropriated another $7 million on it. So it really, as far as I think, we didn't save anything on it. But that's just one example. But
remember, it was on the frontage road. That, as council knows, we've been through a lot of variations on that. We're turning back to TxDOT out of necessity and to keep us at the same amounts that we've already anticipated. So there's no big revenue swing or expenditure swings from the city side of it. TxDOT's picking that up, and Trent's been successful in getting TxDOT to pick up even more than we actually anticipated before. So the city obligations from PDC, from some of our own COs, but that's still along with everything we've been planning last year or so.
Okay.
The good thing is that we've got a separate session for the capital improvement program in the summertime. So we last year we stripped that away from the regular budget process because I don't think it was getting enough attention and eyes, and that worked well. So we're planning on doing that again this year. And so those pages 17 and 18, what we've already got in the hopper right now, and then page 15 would be ones that you might want to focus on when we get closer to that CIP time and able to do exactly what you're saying and making sure we're all comfortable with the project list that we've got coming up.
okay, well, the thing about it, what I want to point out about the other, we decided we could do it a lot faster on the TxDOT project and do it within 5 years, and the difference that we would save in what we're financing for now and get paid back later, percentage from TxDOT. And it didn't quite work out that way. And I know we spent some money up front on it and turned it back into them. So I'm just saying, let's be cautious on some of that because it looks like a rosy deal to jump off and go down in the future and try to do that. We'll spend our money right now and do those projects, get reimbursed for it later on, and we can get them done a lot quicker. But we incurred that real quick too. So I just say be cautious on that. But we can look at those when we go through the capital projects that we're looking at on there. That's pretty well all I have right now, Mayor. Thank you.
Okay.
Clay, do
Any
you want
other-
us to,
Any other comments at this point?
you want us to move on to the TERS?
I want to make sure, this is one of the papers that I anticipated would get some eyes, and that's what we need and want. So I just want to make sure there wasn't anything else to cover on this paper before I moved on. I didn't want to rush through this one at all. So,
Okay.
anything else on the capital project financing?
Does anybody have any objection to having staff look at what it would look like over the 5 or 10-year period if we move to a policy of having our debt service be at 50% or below?
Okay.
I think that could go in line with the question back on the structure of the debt, because if we don't change anything, we're there in 2030. So can we do anything now to kind of smooth that out a little bit?
Yeah, and it's kind of why I think it's a good time now to make that decision, because when we get to 2030, if we don't have a policy in place, it's easy for us to say, hey, we have a lot more debt capacity. Let's go ahead and tackle a bunch of projects. And I think, at least from my perspective, I'd like to kind of set the policy, get it instated. I don't think it needs to be accepted by charter or anything, but we could just at least set an expectation. Compared to our competitive cities, our debt rate, though manageable, is much higher than everybody with the percentage of our tax rate. So I think it's fair to at least set the policy now, so when we do have the freedom, we know we don't want to clip back up.
I've always said that as long as we get some policy directions, we can meet anything all at once. So, I mean, I don't know that, I think the 50/50 is a starting point. I mean, I don't know if that's the right thing that you'll end up being comfortable with, but those kinds of ratios or targets would be helpful for us. Sorry, Member Moore, you had something.
Okay.
No, I agree on that, because I don't want to get in the same place where we are now, where our debt is so high. So if we could do something like that on a policy to keep us from going that direction, then that would be good.
I'd point out and ask genuinely on the bottom of page 11, another unique thing is that historically, cities paid for these MUD rebates out of property taxes. We're starting to move that appropriately over to the water and sewer that belongs there. But there's 6-7 cents of the rate for this particular year that's showing up. And so I'd ask, do you see that when we bring that to you as part of the 50/50, or is that separate from the ratio, or how would you anticipate that?
I'd rather leave it where it's at. If we move it over to the enterprise fund, that's putting more stress on the water and sewer rates to fund it.
I mean, if that's a separate question, I'm talking about like the ratio, because it should be out of water and sewer. I mean, by all rights. So
I don't disagree with that. I don't think that's a conversation. I want to conclude it as part of the conversation of the 50/50 right now, because I don't think I'm ready to say I want to move it over to the enterprise.
and I'm not talking about moving it. I'm just talking about, is that included as normal debt service when you're thinking 50/50, or is that?
Yes.
Visualization.
Yes.
Okay.
You know, we've kind of run through the council and hit the high spots. We keep looking at financially responsible as being our finance department and the budget. It's a lot more than that. It's how we develop the city to invite the businesses and organizations from the Economic Development Corporation, bring it in for future tax base and the future tax dollars coming in. And so it's a wide variety of opportunities how we spend our money. And I think sustainability is going to be one of the future things that have contributed to our future financial responsibility, because you build a road right way, it's going to be here 50 years, so you don't have to rebuild that rascal. And as we go through the process of spending our money wisely on the right type of expenditures, and we develop the city where we get more visitors in, they spend more money, and sales taxes is a good example of financial income in the future. So there's so much going on. What I'd like to do is, we have 6 of these categories, and so that we won't be here all day. What I'd like to do is run through and get the highlights on some of these, and then come back and then hold a good summary on that.
Remember Carbone was trying to get in on this last one, Mayor, before I move on to the
Ramon
second
has
one.
some good ideas, because
Yep.
he should realize that. That's the future idea
Yep.
when he gets through.
Yep.
Thank you, Mayor. I guess to back up to the beginning, in that front pocket, you've got the effective tax rate and the rollback rate. And when you mentioned you'll follow policy, I think we need to, as a body, give you direction. Are we going effective or are we going rollback? So that we don't sit here on the second reading of the final budget and say, man, I wish we went to rollback. I mean, we went to effective. So I guess, do you have that direction?
That's a great question, and yes, I don't have that direction. So you see the numbers there, and let's spend a little time with that, because the first sheet of this long one that shows the effective tax rate, that shows, if I could, on FY21 projected, that we'd have to trim some money and still have the rest of the operations. I believe we included the firefighters in this, right, John? No. So that would not include any of those.
This would not. This only includes the additional cost coming from O&M or CIP projects coming online. So I think there's a few staff in the out years, but in the next year, this doesn't include any additional staff.
So for the no new tax rate scenario there, based on this information, we'd have to trim some money from the baseline FY21, and we wouldn't have those additions. But then the second sheet with a 3.5 rate increase, which is our new rollback, so it's half of what it was, we'd have a little bit of freeboard to be able to continue our baseline and add those staffing for firefighters, public safety, et cetera, that we'd hope to. So those are the scenarios, but that would be very helpful in building that if the target expectation was to come in at the effective versus the rollback.
It shouldn't be a surprise. I've always and will likely always continue to lean towards the effective tax rate. So that's where I'm coming from.
Yeah, I'd like to see the budget be built around the effective tax rate also.
I think I mentioned this last year. I think that I'd like to start as just staying on the effective for a little bit until at least for the immediate future. So that's the direction I would want to give to. Let's stay at effective.
Any additional salient points at this point?
So if we get some other nod in the heads, because that's an important decision point. So we're happy, like I said, you give us that policy direction and we can meet whatever y'all set out. So if the effectives where you want us to build towards the budget, that's what we can build towards. I don't want to be blithe about that. I mean, it's not going to be easy, and you've seen even at the rollback we did last year that we did the effective 2 years ago because of growth and so forth. If it matters a lot, but the 3.5 rollback provides that extra opportunity to make those investments. But for the effective, we'll build it towards what there is. And I remember Carbone's point's exactly right. We need to stay out of doing months of budgeting and work and then get to the last reading and then there being surprises or U-turns or anything else. Like that didn't do anybody any good.
I think there are some ongoing maintenance issues that were mentioned in here, and just years and years of addressing that, particularly with streets, sidewalks, things like that. So I don't want to marry myself to saying that I think the effective tax rate scenario is the one that I want to go with just now. I'd rather see a few more scenarios first. But I suppose if we go down that road, at least it would kind of expose maybe some of the things that we could not address. I would rather just get some things addressed looking long term to kind of lower some of our investment for the future to make sure that we're maintaining these things now and actually get them up to par. I think the longer we put it off, obviously, as it's stated multiple times, the more expensive it's going to be in the future. And I would just rather like to think a little bit more ahead and not just look at what we've got in front of us. So.
I think I heard Councilman Perez, Moore, and Carbone go with effective rate, so I'll be the fourth to say effective tax rate. Thanks.
The same thing on that. I think, I'm not a big fan of raising any kind of tax rate, but what we need to do is go through, we're asking to look at the tax rate, and we're on tab 1. And so, I mean, I think it's really too early to commit either way, one way or the other on it at this present time, because we haven't discussed the rest of the budget and the white papers and things of that nature.
Fair enough, but that helps to give orientation where there's at least a leaning towards, at least by many. And as Member Moore said, or Member Owen said, there's a lot to do between now and then, and we'll give you, it's a question whether you build it with something and then options towards something else, whether we bring it to you as the effective and then say, hey, for X, Y, and Z, beyond that, we still have room under the rollback, but this is what we can do. It's more a question of how we start, and I think that's what we're striving for, and I think I've got a sense of that. So.
I think that finances are the key to our future growth and quality of community. So as we go through the rest of the items that we want to discuss, some of those depend on what the financial condition is. And when we get through, we need to come back and have a general comments on all of the categories. Moving to safe community and Carbone, why don't you just make some salient points about that? And once we get through, each one of you make a comment, then we'll have general comments on it.
So the second paper, Mayor, is on the TERS, number 2, and that's still under tab 1. We haven't touched on this yet. That's the next one up. And this is something that is not ripe for exactly this budget, but we wanted some awareness and eyes on this. TERS number 2 is at Shadow Creek, and the city years ago made a substantial investment for the extension of Broadway, FM 518 west of 288. And the city's is eligible to get that reimbursed. That's $8.5 million that would come to us, basically for our choice in how we do that, how we allocate that. We're in line for that. And the TERS is performing so well that we could start to see that money as early as 2022. So it's not for next year's budget. The idea is that we would use that money as a seed for primarily for the fleet system, and get out of this trap of never have enough money for normal fleet replacements and having to borrow from different sources and cobble that together. So we just wanted some primarily awareness of that topic. It's a good thing, and a great opportunity to make a long-term investment. And so we just wanted to put some eyes on that. And if there's any questions about how that would work, or if there's a different direction that you think we should start to plan towards or look ahead, that'd be very helpful at this point.
I appreciate the heads up in the paper. I think that last paragraph on page 20 is a huge issue. And whatever, I guess, as soon as we can get in front of that and work with our state legislature, I think we've got to make sure we've got our head wrapped around that calculation and what that could do to us.
It's a big topic. Maybe it's already in the law. We've asked people have been through this before, but just as a concern, because how those calculations and how they consider that. So
right.
The school district. So we got a couple legislative sessions, worst case, to get something fixed. Otherwise, maybe it's not an issue, but we need to keep that in mind.
Yeah, certainly.
Little.
I don't disagree. We do need to talk with our representative and make sure that we're out ahead of that. We've got 4 legislative sessions before that happens, before it becomes a problem. And hopefully that's enough time. Hopefully, fingers crossed. I think with respect to the TERS, this reimbursement, maybe even future reimbursements that come our way, I think for us the guidance should be: do we use it to pay off debt? If you get a big return, a big tax return, do you use it to pay off the credit cards, or do you go out and spend on something that you really wanted? The motor pool fund is certainly something that is valuable, and I don't want to trivialize it. But do we take the $8.5 million, try and pay down even more debt, and as TERS reimbursement comes down, be aggressive about debt, or do we want to give staff direction as these reimbursements come in yeah, go ahead and let's find the appropriate place to spend the money. For between now and 2022, I think we can have a conversation about whether it's seating for motor pool, whether we split it for motor pool and find something else. If it was just my decision, I'd say let's go ahead and take that value and start catching up on some sidewalk repair that's overdue. It wouldn't do a huge amount to the backlog we have on sidewalks, but it would certainly be a lot more than the 500,000 we're spending on it per year now. But I think maybe primarily we need to have discussion of whether we want to focus that influx of money into debt.
William?
Anybody else on that, TERS? Again, it's a much longer range topic, but.
No, I'm all for putting it into the motor pool fund to seed that. I mean, we're talking about, we already have so many vehicles that we need to replace. So I mean, that would be a good thing that we could do that. But my concern on that is it's a one-time contribution to the motor pool fund. So how do we keep that going? We always talk about how we always get an excess of money from somewhere to put into something, but it's just for that one slug, and then how do we maintain it going forward? So I think it would be good to seed that fund to be able to actually have money in there to buy the vehicles that we need to buy. But I do have just a question on how do we continue to fund that long term?
Great comment. So much along the same lines, this would be a seed, and it's not spending more money than we would otherwise. It's just getting us to a spot where we have more flexibility and putting that much money substantially into the fund so that we aren't cost avoiding things that we should be buying otherwise. And the answer to how we would do that, it's with those rental fees. So if we can get this much money into the fund to seed it, then the idea is that those rental fees that are based upon the depreciations and so forth would sustain the fund, and then that'd be something in perpetuity that would go on that we could it would pay itself. So we're already starting to pay those rental fees based on the depreciation tables from the funds, and that would continue to keep it going forward.
Okay, yeah, then I would definitely be all in favor of that then.
I'm with Member Moore. I think that putting it into the motor pool fund would be a good thing. I think that putting it towards debt, it would have such an insignificant, it looked like, about 2% effect on the total debt. So, to me, if we're having to do that and then we have to end up financing vehicles in the future, I don't know what the trade-off would be, but it seems like it would be an appropriate use of the money on the motor pool side.
All right. The next topic under that tab is the mid-year allocation. We've described in there that how we finished FY20. You'll be getting the audit pretty quick here in March. And so with that, because of revenues somewhat over anticipated, since those were estimated conservative and expenditures under, we've got net monies approaching $3 million. So that's all on page 23, the numbers there are outlined. So suggestion is to put about half of that towards cash balance, adding to our fund balance, but then investing for one time. Other options would for the City Hall Annex roof. You've got that on your agenda for Monday night to award. It's in the intent to reimburse for certificates of obligation. So rather than following through on that and paying for that with those COs, here's a great opportunity for a relatively small, finite amount and paying for that with this cash. And then the other piece, going back to what I was just talking about, we've got a gap in our fleet replacements, and we're trying to whittle down our inventory of the old police cruiser Crown Victorias, and like to replace 14 more of those. That would give us only 2 left. And so the allocation that we'd like to bring to you would be half of that roughly for the roof replacement to pay cash, and the other half, quarter of it for the rough quarter of it for the Crown Vics and half of it for cash savings.
I know when we talked about the Crown Vics, there was we were going after a large percentage of the vehicles that we needed, but not the full amount. And forgive my poor memory. How many would we have? How many additional vehicle replacements would we have left if we follow this plan?
Vehicles in total, or just the Crown Vics?
The vehicles in total.
I mean, there's
I'm sorry, just the Crown Vics. I apologize. That's what
be
we just.
two more after these 14.
So I would be on board with just getting all of them done, and then just wiping that slate clean, taking that out of the fund balance, and then putting the quarter amount towards the roof annex. That was kind of the direction when this was initially discussed that I want to give. I want to just kind of stay consistent with that.
Yeah, so the 1.4 million back to the fund balance. So what does that do to us by going ahead and replacing the other two Crown Vics by taking money out of that 1.4 million?
Maybe like $1.2 million. I mean, by the time you put the equipment out, not that much, but what do you think, John?
Yeah, we'd have to crunch the numbers. We could probably add those two on top and be, I think, $140,000 or roughly $70,000 a piece, depending on which Crown Vics they are. So depending on how the numbers shake out on the operation side, if we pick up some money, we may be able to just add those in on top and still hit that. I think we're moving from 17 to 18%. So there is a chance, depending on how the projections work, that we could just add those on top of what's already.
Yeah, I'd like to just go ahead and get those done and taken care of and out of the way. Get rid of all the Crown Vics.
I'd like to see a split between the motor pool and the streets and sidewalks, provide something back to the citizens. If we can get a little more useful life out of the vehicles that we're using, then let's try to do that. And hope Chief Spires doesn't have my license plate.
I would normally agree, but I've been in those Crown Vics. They need to be replaced, I think. Having trouble starting a police vehicle, is probably not a good thing. And I've witnessed that. So, I mean, I think getting those replaced and putting community safety above all other things, I think is pretty paramount, especially these days. So I'm for the just getting the whole replacement job done.
You want to clarify whether you're in the front or the back of that vehicle?
Okay.
The inventory of the vehicles I see is on page 24, just for reference. So, but the mid-year allocation is something we'll bring to you shortly. And so we can formalize that coming up here. But wanted to get some eyeballs on that. Sounds like there's pretty consistent on that. So, the next topic is the internal service funds update. We've these all tying together nicely. We've got a large set of assets, fixed assets, vehicles, buildings. We started in that separate fleet fund. Cynthia advocated for that, and we've started on that last couple years, I believe. We'd like to move into the next things that make sense, and that's a facilities fund and a technology fund. In many ways, this isn't, we're not spending more money. It's how you identify that and cost allocate for it. But we need to make investments in our facilities. Those are things that, if we don't have a vehicle like this, it's too easy to defer the maintenance and it catches up, as was referenced earlier. And so we've provided a report in here that talks briefly about the existing motor pool fund, how we fund that, and then moving into next future for facilities and technology. That'd be the next aspects of that. So on the questions here, we talk about just consensus on supporting that and keeping along that path.
Start with Carbone.
Thank you, Mayor. I mean, it's just a presentation, so I guess I'd leave that to staff's recommendation as to if they've got the capacity to implement both of those. If you want to do a facilities this year and plan on technology next year, I'm fine with that. But really, I think it comes down to manpower. I'm fine either way.
And the money to fund these additional internal funds comes from the general fund, correct?
Enterprise and it doesn't matter. So all the funds contribute based upon the vehicles that are allocated, the equipment that they use, and the buildings, the
Okay,
technology.
and each of these funds will have their own budget
Right.
annually, and I just don't want to see these budgets growing, which causes the effect of the overall budget to grow. Who determines the amount that would be allocated to each of these internal funds?
So we have formulas based upon the vehicles that are assigned, based upon the facilities, based upon the technology, and those are cost counted, and then it comes to you in the budget process annually.
All right, thank you.
Like, oh, sorry.
I'm all in favor of trying to separate these as much as we can to just get a better understanding of how much we have for each one of these. So I'm cool with it.
Thank you, Member Moore. Like I said earlier, I'm fine with how we do our internal accounting. I don't think that's really all that pertinent. I would like, it's tangential, and we can talk about this later if we want, but since we're talking about the facilities, I'd like us to go ahead and get that, as part of this, get the facilities assessment that we discussed in the past, so we can have a better target of what we need in that facilities fund once we establish it.
Yeah, I agree with Councilmember Perez on that, to go ahead and get that established and put it in there so we know what we're really dealing with on the numbers. But I think, overall, what we're looking at now, I think, there's still some additional information that needs to be gathered and discussion had on all of this before we can really come in and make a full faith decision on this budget process. So I appreciate the conversation that we've had on it so far on each one of these areas, but I think, more conversation needs to be made on there, what the true expenditures are and what the tax rate's going to be, and come back and definitely make get into it of the budget of what we can spend and what we can't spend, and how that's going to affect everything else that we have within the budget. And it was a good wish list on a lot of these as we go through, but I don't think we're going to be able to handle all of it. On the tax rate. So my thought is on all of this is, we're having general concept of it now and discussion, but I don't really think that we have enough detail on it now, or went into more discussions on it, how to set some of these within the policy.
Well, the advantage is we're not asking you to adopt a budget tonight. It's all we're doing is helping us set up the stage to do exactly that. So, well, good thing we're not asking for one. So,
Open it up to the council.
next piece, probably a little more involved, and this is our employee total compensation. We could talk about rollbacks and effectives and what have you. But the largest parts of certainly the general fund, other operating funds are employee costs. We've only been able to do the 2% as far as across the board. That's described in here. We did conduct a salary total compensation survey just after Harvey, as I recall, and we adopted 100% of moving into the recommendations from that. And so we've absorbed those costs, but it's time to look and do the next study. And we also have in here some targets going into the budget of what you'd like us to at least keep in mind for building the future budgets. I mean, as this would contrast with much of what we've talked about up to this point is, we've talked about wanting to keep the rates down and burdens down, et cetera, but we also need to have to compensate and pay our staff and compete for talent. And so, this is the other half of that equation. We've got to be able to keep that up, and we can't fall far behind just like anything else, streets or sidewalks or employee pay structures. So we outlined there, what we'd like to do and, in terms of our pay plans, and want to get any feedback that you might have or other eyeballs on that.
Council Levin, in response to that?
Yeah, yes, Mayor. It'll come as no surprise that I've advocated for stronger compensation for our staff. Every year I've been up here, I'm advocating for it again. I think 2% is our bare minimum. Certainly was better than not getting a raise for several years, as we did in the late 2000s. But 2% is what we owe them, just to be able to make sure that the dollar that we give them today spends the same way as the dollar tomorrow. I'd like to see what it would look like to get it at 3 or 4% when we go into budget. I think the most it's the same diatribe I've had for a while, but the most efficient systems are the ones that reduce turnover. We'll get the value back by paying our employees, by having them stay. I think a great example of that is what we're struggling right now in utility billing. That department has been underfunded for quite a while out of necessity. It's a low-paying job. Those people get yelled at a lot. We have a lot of turnover because we just don't compensate them enough to want them to stay. And then we're seeing the resultant of that more drastically than I think we should normally, to not trivialize the somewhat disastrous situation we're dealing with there. But I think that one of the cures for that is to try and get better compensation for those individuals, along with all of our staff, and be able to, this will dovetail into our staffing conversation later, but be able to fund departments like that are critical and are the front face of our city to our customer base, to our citizens, to make sure that we have we have enough people there to be able to manage the load, because that equates to better customer service. So I would like to see 2%. I think we're going to do the 2%. We don't have a choice. We want to keep our people. We're going to have to do the 2%. I'd like to see what it would look like to our budget if we go 3% or 4%. Before we adopt the full budget.
Yeah, I tend to agree on that. We've been given just 2% the last several years, and it's just not really working. You want to keep good people. You want to recruit new people, not only new people but good people to work for the city, to provide those best services. So, yes, I agree with that. But in some research that I was doing, it looked like at some point in time, the civil service pay used to be on a different rating than what it is now. So they were kind of completely separate from the rest of staff. And somewhere along the line, we got away from that. And per the study that we did for the police officers, it doesn't look like that we've really kept up with that, and we need to try to address that. And I do know, talking with some of the fire department, they're going to be coming to us asking for some kind of different pay scale or higher pay also. So I don't know if there's any consensus with looking at civil service pay a little bit different than the rest of staff pay. But I'd like to throw that out there and just kind of maybe we can get a white paper or something on that in the very near future.
We do have a separate civil service pay plan, and that's what's described in here, that the recommendation or suggestion is to target actually moving that part of the plan up higher. So on page 31.
Yeah, but we never really do that, and we need to focus more on doing that civil service pay plan.
So there is a separate pay plan, just so we're all clear about that. And so the suggestion is to, on that bullet 2 on page 31, of trying to move that the 4% increase. And on the top of page 32, that shows the total cost implications for each of the funds. So the base of 2% for the general fund would be $1.4 million. If even the 3%, let alone the 4%, that would be $1.9 million, almost $2 million. So another $600,000, which we'd like to invest if we got to the 3%.
In doing some research on this as well, I saw a couple of things. One of them, just to kind of find opportunities to increase across the board. I know that you mentioned potentially merit-based increases here, but I didn't see in the recommendations, and I've seen that those have really created more disparities than they've served to I guess, increase overall morale and kind of bring some equity to the employees in the organization. So one of the things that I found was to maybe look at our overall structure again, look at the organizational structure, try to find opportunities to make those increases across the board and mitigate the long-term obligations, really justify each one of our positions. Go back and look at that. And then ahead of doing a compensation study, if that's something that we move forward with, in the interim, before we can make those justifications, I just wondered if we'd ever considered bonuses instead of just increases as a potential incentive for recruiting, and then we can talk about retention once we get the compensation studies.
So you're talking about hiring bonuses, just so I'm clear?
Yes, sir.
So the only thing that we've done coming to mind is we have a system where if somebody comes to us from another police agency with certifications and they stay with us for a certain amount of time, there's that lateral kind of transfer opportunity. But we don't have like a system of signing bonuses, if you will, or something like that. Or
Because that would give us the opportunity to have that incentive, but it wouldn't, put us in a position where we're obligated long-term if we get a compensation study that indicates otherwise.
The challenge is, frankly, we've got such a wide variety of positions and, competitive markets for positions. I mean, what was mentioned with, some of the frontline staff, we may get we get tons of applicants. We get 300-400 people apply for police officer here, which is great. So it's more about like once they're here, trying to keep people, fair and competitive and not even necessarily retainage for all positions. Some of it is, but some of it's, just making sure that we're being right by the people internally and what have you. So it's very complex and never ending and, all that.
Yeah, I wouldn't be opposed to moving to 3%, but I just would like to see the compensation study, and I just don't want to get ahead of that.
Yeah, that's fair.
Thank you.
William?
Yeah, I don't have a problem with a 2% across the board and would even consider 3% once we run it and talk about it. That's all I have on this.
Yep. Couple things. I guess first, just looking at the timing of the last comp and class study we did, I think we're already behind the curve in in terms of how long it takes to get it done and implementation. So I know right now in the white paper it shows to begin later this year. If we can move that up just to see where we're at, I would be all in favor of that. Bottom of page 30 talks about employee benefits and pet insurance. I'm more concerned about health insurance for people versus pet insurance. I don't know where that falls in, but I sure hope that we're not starting to fund pet insurance. A couple other things in terms of benefits. I know for years we've talked about bilingual incentive pay. I'd like to see what that would look like in terms of budgetary impact. I don't think it'd have a major issue, as well as how we're handling unused sick time. If we currently have a buyback plan, is that something that employees would be interested in, and what that the cost to implement that would be as well. That's all I have on that section.
I know that pet insurance is on the wish list, but I would probably be a no on that too.
I wouldn't even put it on the wish list. I think it's just things that people do out there in the world, and it'd be a long time before we got to that. So.
Yeah, I would rather have bilingual pay over, that benefit of pet insurance. So.
On Mayor, if you don't mind. I guess we did update on the compensation and classification study in FY 18.
Yeah, it was right,
That's when-
Harvey, I remember we were dealing with that and we brought that, so yeah.
And that was completed, we did it in 2 phases.
No, we implemented it all 100% mid-year of FY 19, maybe it's 18, sorry. 18.
So there's another one going to be coming up on
That's
classification?
the schedule, yeah.
Okay.
We can pull that forward and, what I'd suggest is probably we kind of had in the back of our heads to, get going on that. And then, like I said at the outset of this page, that we can say we want to do all these things. The top of page 32 shows the dollar amounts. And so, when we talk about bring us back something that targets the effective rate, that's great. But something's got to give. And so we'll bring that back. And maybe if there's money available, we can set aside an allocation in the next FY21 that would implement the pay study whenever that is, like we did last year, or whenever we did that 4 years ago.
Okay, and so the compensation and our classification study, that was in 18, and we did 100% over a 2-year period of time. Last year, in last year's budget, it was a 2% increase for the COLA, and then on top of that, I think that what was done was money was established in your budget to come in and.
It's our budget, the city budget,
Yeah,
and we adopted
and
that we had the one-time, rather, because we only could do the 2%,
Yeah.
we did across the boards in December. It's not a bonus per se, but it was, half of what we do for the longevity. So it was like $300,000 total, one time.
Yeah, so the thing about it, we did the compensation and classification study and got that out of the way, and then we done the cost of living adjustment, and maybe we should change the name of that because.
Which one, the cost of living or the?
Yeah, and just and do an adjustment because there's different thing of the cost of living on a COLA and what it's based upon, and then we did those and then put. I guess 300,000 plus for end of the year, last payday of the year to give employees. So, when you come across and you look at it, the compensation side of it not only affects that, but it affects like I guess that was stated previously on there that it's a benefit side also. But I thought in previous years, and I guess I don't know if it's still the same or not. But when employees work overtime, that can be either used as buying out at the end of the year or whenever, overtime or taking additional comp time off, or there's 2 or 3 adjustments through there to do that.
So you either get overtime or there's some people that get comp time in lieu of that. So you get one or the other. You don't get both.
No, that's what I'm saying. It's not both. I mean, it's one or the other. Or somebody, if they're not taking a vacation time, they could sell it back to the city, a percentage of that, right?
Right. Before I say right, Michelle, did you follow that? Or?
We currently do not have a vacation sellback program as a general rule. If there are issues with either staff load or staff numbers, there can be exceptions made, but there is typically not anything on the books right now that allows for regular sellback of vacation or sick time.
Okay. All right. Well, I appreciate that, Michelle, understanding that better. Yeah, and the thing about it, if you're going to give a raise, I mean, we're talking about 2%, and I think some says 3%, maybe up to 4%. At this point in time, you don't know what the COLA is going to be. Bottom line, and is it a 2%? Huh? No. But at the end of the year, and based on the federal level, the COLA, cost of living, is indexed there. So, if it's going to be a raise, just say it's going to be a raise given to the impact. But I think when we look at not only the cost of living, how much money you put in somebody's pocket additionally on there, but and how that affects, the other part of it, which are the insurance and things of that nature. So I think, I'm not against, certainly, after being an employee with the city of Houston for 13 years, I'm not against giving employees salary increases, but I think, right now it's too early to come to the table and say we're going to do 3% or we want to do 4% or we want to do 2%.
Unless you want to adopt the budget tonight, today we don't have to
No,
decide
exactly,
that.
and I appreciate you doing that. But that's just food for thought when we
Yep.
go through here.
I would say, I think maybe the 2 and 3 and 4%, I think there's some interest in seeing what those values are when we get into budget. I do know that by taking effective and then adding the additional cost, that does cause stress to the overall budget. So if we get into the budget and we have to take a look at to adopt the 3 or 4%, would require an increased an adjustment to the rate. I would end up being supportive of that, but I don't want to. I want to see what it does to the overall budget before I adopt a rate increase. But I'm sensitive to what you were saying. It's not blind that we're saying take effective then add the cost, but I'd rather see what the additional cost is and then adjust the rate.
Gotcha.
I guess I'll jump in on the buyback. I read over what we were provided by the PPOA, and I think I'd like to see what the buyback option with the cap would be. We'd already offer sick pay as it is. It would have to be paid out anyway, so I don't have an issue with that. And I think bilingual incentive pay, I think, would be something that would be beneficial to the city as a whole. I think, again, if we're looking, the next category being safe community, I think obviously having police officers who can communicate with our diverse community would be a positive, net positive. So I'd like to see that as well.
Just to that point, we've looked at bilingual, and as you sort of alluded to, it'd be, I don't know why we wouldn't do anything across the board if we're able to do it. Same applies for any counter, any code enforcement, any permit, any fire interaction, what have you. So it wouldn't make any sense to me to make it one angle.
I would jump on that. I don't think we should. If we're going to do that for any one department, it needs to go to all the departments. We need to look at the financial implications to all the departments, particularly the ones that are customer service related. I don't think I'm ready to go down that path. But if we look at it, I want to look at it completely, not just one department at a time.
I would agree with that. I think that's fair. Thank you for that input.
Yeah, I appreciate the PPOA because they're the only ones that are organized that can actually, I guess, legally or chain of command communicate with us. So that's why we're hearing it from them. But I think it is a valid concern and some good opportunities across the whole city.
Yeah, especially the region we live in. There's multiple companies that offer that benefit, so I think that's a good benefit. And I too would like to look at some of the buyback, or even maybe, maybe not having sick time hours, but maybe personal time hours, where that way you're not having to just use that day as a sick time day, but maybe just make it a personal day opposed to sick time. There's a lot of companies that started doing that. It allows you to utilize that time a little bit better than just as a day for being sick. And there's all kind of implications around that in their HR on sick days. So,
Clay, based on the last salary survey we did, which I think was about 3 years ago, what percentile was the city in based on the market study?
Thanks. So from that study, there was different scenarios that they provided the information.
Overall.
I'm sorry?
Overall, where were we?
I can't remember. It depends on positions. It was all over the board. Fire was significantly below. But what's important, I guess, would be that once we moved 100%, we said at that study, at that time, we went to 100% of what that said. So there were across the board different changes, and it required moving different positions, different rates.
Okay, and the comparable city chart, it shows what some of the other cities are. If we could get where Pearland is, maybe added to the chart, that would be helpful. Thank you.
I guess just to go back, and when we did that class and comp study, that was based off of what the market in the end of 16, and then we put it into effect in 18. So, we got to 100% 2 years later.
I think it was, I can't remember the timing, Michelle, you remember? But you're always doing those from what you have at the time in the text
Right.
for the study, I think. But when was the information gathered?
We began to gather information at the very end of 2016, I believe, through 2017 for implementation in April of 2018.
Thank you.
Anything else on that one? I figured that would be interesting. So next paper was community development fees, and staff brought this forward. And rather than just repeating what we've always been doing, we'd like to opportunity to take a step back, and it's probably appropriate to look at our fee structure for development fees and so forth comprehensively, and more from the angle of cost of service, so that we get that idea. At least it's information, and we know, whether it's high, low for the service provided. And so there's a proposal in here. We could even, if there's interest, it's $29,000. We could do that mid-year, or not at all, or next year's budget. So that's sort of, wanted to flag that and get some options for that.
So I mean, the way I read it, we're going to pay 30 grand to a consultant to tell us that we can raise fees, or we
No,
should raise.
it's going to tell us what our cost of service is. So
Right.
it depends. It gives you a basis for doing that. We can just make it up as we go along, or we can just increase what we've been doing. That's one way to avoid that.
Do we not have the metrics? I mean, we know what the budget of that department is, and with Track It, we know what they're touching.
That'd be one way to do it. I think what this is suggesting is to be a little bit, as described in here, a lot more in-depth and scientific about it. So
Yeah, 30 grand. I don't know. Are we going to analyze this thing to death so we know whether we're going to up a fee $10 or $12?
we take in $1.8 million, $1.5 million. It's significant every year. So this would be a cost to square those. So
I'd like to see a staff analysis before we go spend 30 grand on it.
I agree with you.
I'm of the same mindset. I don't trivialize the value that the study can provide, but but we're not a business. Using a business perspective, is if we spend $30,000, are we treating that as an investment where we would get an ROI on the $30,000? I don't think we need to spend the $30,000 to be able to internally justify a rate increase or fee increase. There's more to it. I know that we're oversimplifying it, but I think that if staff can justify a rate increase, if they think that it's necessary in order to be able to better compensate their efforts, I would trust their judgment rather than having to pay a consultant to tell us that. So I would say that I'm not ready for that study right now. I would entertain an idea of a rate increase, but I don't think we need a study to do it.
3? Somebody else wants to say it? Okay, so that's a hard no. Next paper is on workers' comp, and this is, Melissa and HR did this paper up, and from what I understood of it, it's very well done, and it's got a lot of good positives for the city. We'd like to move towards a risk fund that would really provide us some better accounting for how we make those expenditures. There's also, I had some good notes on this, now I can't find them. But there's also a lot of advantages to move to a self-funding on the workers' comp. By doing these two things, we would avoid battling with our insurance company about certain costs and be able to pay out claims more efficiently when they're justified, not just willy-nilly. And like for our own vehicles, like when they get into that car crashes, rather than going back and forth with the insurance company, we'd be able to move quicker for replacements of fleet vehicles, as one example. That's on the risk fund side, but then the workers' comp, rather than paying that premium, we pay ourselves and work out of that. So again, it's more technical. I mean, that's not my expertise, but Melissa's here and she can explain that if the needs be, but I think it does have a lot of potential for positivity in how we both financially and operationally run that operation.
I appreciate the white paper. I guess the as long as we have kind of that catastrophic coverage in place, because it'd be like saying, hey, I hadn't had a car wreck in 5 years, I'm gonna start self-insuring myself, because I could have saved money for 5 years, and me and my wife will both be in wrecks next week. So, as long as we have that stopgap and we're comfortable that it is going to be a savings, then I don't see a problem moving forward with that. As long as the all-in costs, including additional staff time, the TPA, kind of everything, all in is going to save us money, that's great. But I don't know, those are my concerns.
Would we be looking at managing the internal staff or the internal fund through existing staff, or would we need to hire somebody to be able to manage that?
Melissa and Michelle take on.
It would all be done with current staff. We would need no new additional staff other than the TPA and that type of thing, but that's all outsourced.
And long term, we would be able to manage that with existing staff.
Yes.
Then I'm in agreement with Member Carbone. I think this is one of the many things where we're always looking for cost savings. To save a couple $100,000 a year to subsidize other cities so that we can have workers' comp insurance. I think is great. Workers' comp is set, so we can tell we can kind of somewhat project the costs and seeing how few payouts we've had to make. And how much money we spent to be able to cover those payoffs. It was 2 over the value of $50,000, 1 for an unfortunate death, and 15 that we're still paying for. Other than that, we really haven't had a whole lot of high-value workers' comp claims. So I think it's better that we're self-funded. I think it's a better use of our money than sending it to TML and letting them use it for smaller cities. What's the transition period for us to get to that?
What we'd be looking at, if it's approved, is bringing a TPA on this summer and going ahead and going forward in October if everybody goes with it.
Are we not terminating any existing contracts with penalties?
No, we just have to give them 30 days notice that we're going to do it.
Okay. Then yeah, I think that's a no-brainer. Obviously, the catastrophic coverage is a necessity. I don't anticipate we would go forward without it, but I think it's a great idea. Thank y'all for bringing it up.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's a great idea. Anywhere we can save money with insurance that's pretty outstanding. So.
All right, it's necessary. I don't want to say evil, but it's just part of doing business, and I think the way we structure it. And again, give credit to Michelle and Melissa for bringing this forward and vetting it, and look forward to bringing that out. The next one's going to require a little concentration, and that's, as you all are well aware, we've had a long-standing services contract. It's probably our largest ongoing contract for years. That's for solid waste collection. It's very comprehensive, 2 times a week, curbside collection, recycling. And it's time, and council's already committed that we need to go out to the market and test that for a contract. We've engaged a consultant who's expert in this area and starting to design the contract. We did a survey, got a huge response. Vast majority of people were in that survey were in favor of carts. And so we're at the point now where we need to design the actual RFP, and we need to get some parameters around that. It's a little tricky. We don't want to make it so complicated and so many different choices that it's overwhelming for both the potential bidders and for us to analyze and for you to get down to. And if there's not interest in some things that we could ask for, it's better to know that now, so we just don't even ask that, and we focus on what we're really interested in. And so if I could, on the long sheets, there's A through E questions, and maybe if you could use that as a basis for your discussion and feedback, that would really, really help us out. I would concentrate and ask that we need to get some consensus and understanding of the term of the contract. We typically, when we have a policy for normal sorts of professional services, we don't go more than 3 years, but there's such huge capital investments on the part of these firms, that's impossible. We'd be paying out the nose for for doing that short term. At a minimum 5 years, 7's kind of considered a sweet spot. I suggest even we ask for a cost option for a 10-year contract, just so you know what that is, if you're willing to consider that. But we need to have some basis for understanding on that, like a 5, 7, 10 on the term of the contract. And then there's some other parameters in there, as I said, on that, on the questions on your long sheet. So I could go through each of those A through E, but it might be better if people just jump in and say, you know, what grabs you and what there's interest in or not in on that contracting.
Thank you, Clay. I think this is something that I've had to put a lot of effort into for several years. And I appreciate that we are where we are. We're going to be able to terminate our existing contract early so we can get into this new contract preemptively. My direction would be we kind of baseline what we have right now, 2 days a week with recycling once a week. I think that from some of the discussions I've had, both at the TCQ committee I'm in and talking to some of our vendors, I don't think that there's as much of a necessity for us to separate the green waste as a special pickup and have it processed at a different facility. I think that can, if our members really are, that's a priority for them, they can certainly, we can certainly potentially look at the Stella Rivers Center to be able to receive that, but I think it can get picked up with regular waste, so we don't have to pay a premium there. Talking with citizens, I think the cans are the direction that we're going to go. We're going to get some pushback from people who aren't in favor of it as a way to probably offset that. I'd like us to look at having two can options for every citizen, so a 96-gallon and I believe the 64-gallon is the smaller one, both for recycling and for trash, so that some of our older citizens or single citizens who just don't produce enough trash don't have to have as large a can in their or store a larger can, or have to, you know, end up waiting, or have the belief that they got to fill this thing up before it gets picked up. That's some of the concerns that I've heard. So I'd like to have the 2-can option for again, for both trash and recycling. As far as the fuel for the vehicle, I personally don't care. I think that's a means and methods on the provider. I do not want to dictate that. For some, if they want to move to that, that's their choice. If they do not, again, that's their choice. I don't want to set that priority, because that priority would cost us. I think with the length of the contract, I think 5 years would certainly be a minimum, in keeping with the intent of what we were trying to do when we set the 3-year cap on the contracts. I'd say we can do a 5-year minimum and then put in maybe 2 2-year extensions for the same vendor, or 3 2-year extensions. So instead of a 10-year contract, it's an 11-year contract, and that way maybe we can get some of the benefit of having the extended contract by having some integration in there, get some price, be price conscious. But if we have service issues, or if the vendor's not providing what we need, we have a term for which at least one generation of council could be able to terminate it and move forward and go out to bid. I think there was one other thing that's slipping my mind, but I believe that's the direction I want to go. I think that addresses the concerns that I've heard through the citizenry, and I think that puts us on a better path.
I would agree on a majority of that. The 2 times a week pickup, I think, is very essential, because especially around the holiday times, if you have a large family, you're not going to fit everything in the can during those holiday times, and then you're going to have to hold it for a whole nother week. I'm not in favor of doing that. You don't have anywhere to put it. It's stinking up your garage or sitting on the side of your house for something to dig through it. So I actually lived someplace where they did that to us, and since then I've been very adamant about making sure that never happens again, because it was a horrible deal to have to contend with. I would like to see some options on cart sizing. We do have a lot of elderly people that, when we got the recycle cans, they were very upset because they can't manage those carts because they're so big. So I'd like to see some options on not only the garbage can sizes, but also the recycle can sizes in this contract. And then as far as like the trucks being, natural gas operated, that's up to the company. I'm not going to dictate how they do their business. They're the experts on that. Let them figure that out. I always like to hear the trash truck coming down the street. That way I know I need to run out there and hurry up and get my trash out to this curb. So if it was a natural gas truck, I probably wouldn't hear it and then I'd miss it. So, but yeah, those are my main concerns is, twice a week pickup and then some sizing on the cart sizes.
That's his notice to get up. in
Go
the
ahead,
morning, I
Councilman
know.
Perez.
That's my notes to get up in the morning and go run out there.
Yeah, I agree with most of all of this that's been said on this, but I know there has been some discussion of doing commercial and independent of the citizens trash pickup. I think we need to leave it all in one and have one vendor doing both commercial as we have right now and residential. With the other, I think, of what was been said so far, the period of time from 5 to 7 years, I think is good with a renewal date on it. Because I know that when we looked at this in the beginning on there was a difference in the cost of the vehicle when you're actually going to go out and pick up your trash the way that you're doing now on these side loaders that to do. I don't know exactly what the cost was, but on the vehicles to be able to do it and to pick it up the cart and do it, there was a different cost to it. And so I think that has something to offset the time limit of the contract in order to try to get some of that capital cost that they would have to throw into it at that. But the other part of being able to do that, I think, that the only thing I would add to it is just leave it as one contract for all the trash pickup and not divide it up. And I've talked to some of the people in the other cities, and they said this is the way to do it. Don't try to manage two different contracts, and you'll get a cheaper overrun, altogether, or the daily pickup or the pickup for the residential. So that would be the only thing I would add to what's been said so far.
There was one other thing I wanted to be able to, or wanted to input, which is us have the option to mandate where our trash is taken. At least have that opportunity in the contract to make that selection if we so choose.
And I had one final piece on this, and that is our recycle center. So we usually can get a really good deal with trash recycling, and then with our recycle center, we have a lot of hazardous chemicals, paints, gasolines, stuff like that usually roll up into the trash contract. So I would be interested in seeing that piece get put into this contract also for any waste disposal from the recycle center, for any gasolines, paints, oils, et cetera, that they take in over there also.
You guys done? Yeah, I guess me and Councilman Carbone are the redheaded stepkids down this end. Yeah, I think the citizens have overwhelmingly spoken, and they want the 96-gallon carts, which I wholeheartedly agree with. So I think we should get quotes for that and look at the option for the elderly people to maybe they have either a door pickup or smaller carts that they can handle. As far as 1 day a week, we're empty nesters. That works for us. I don't know how it's going to work for other people, but I guess look at an option for 1 and 2 days, what the cost structure would be. Let's see, as far as the contract length, obviously if they go to a 96-gallon carts, they're going to have a huge capital expenditure to either buy new trucks or revamp their current trucks. So they're going to probably require a minimum of 5, maybe even 7-year contract to recapture those costs and still make money. So that's kind of how I'd like to look at different options when we do our RFP. That's all.
All right. I mean, the survey's great, but there's no pricing. So, I mean, we went out and asked everybody, what do you want? What's ideal? So I guess that's my biggest concern is we've got this feedback and what's pricing going to be. In terms of specific questions asked, yes, on A, I'd like to see apples to apples. What's the price of continuing the service as is? And then also with B, what would that 96-gallon cart pricing look like? For C, I think we should reach out to maybe Country Place in Bella Vita. It's a high concentration of some elderly folks. I don't think they're going to want 96-gallon carts. So I don't know how we handle that, but we need to handle that delicately. In terms of compressed natural gas, that's on them. I care about the price. Contract terms, I'd like to see 5, 7, and 10 years. I appreciate staff's kind of input on the shorter term, but with something this large and the large capital investment, I'd like to see what that decrease is over the term. Commercial versus residential. I was sitting in the audience when we made the change to water rates to push the burden onto businesses off of the residential side, and I can see that coming again, and I'm very hesitant on that. I think the commercial side is already higher than neighboring cities. So if we're going to put it all together, that's great, but I don't know that I want to overcharge businesses to help subsidize the residents. I mean, we're doing that in a lot of other areas. There's a calendar in there on page 80. I appreciate that timing. With such a big contract, I don't want council to be backed into a corner if we're making a decision on a 10-year contract. So as soon as you can communicate and get things to us, there's so many moving variables on this. I'd like to see it sooner rather than later. And I don't know if that means bringing in the consultant for a workshop type setting, because truthfully, we have no idea where the big dollar values are. How much is green waste costing us? Is that separate green waste costing everybody $10 a month more? Or is it 10 cents more? And those numbers will at least help me make a better decision. And in regards to the recycle center, I mean, the current contract has this franchise fee that kickbacks and loops around to fund KPB as well. So I appreciate Adrian stepping out. But I don't, again, I want to make sure that we're all looking at the full picture and how much of this contract is artificially high to circle back around and fund a different organization. And that's all the comments I have for right now.
I've got one more quick comment. On the survey that went out to our residents when asked about the 96-gallon can for their regular household garbage, it didn't include asking them how they felt about 1 day a week. So 81% were in favor of it, but I think that number would be lower if they knew their garbage would only be picked up 1 day per week. Unless I missed it, I didn't see it in the survey. Was it?
Yeah, I don't know about that question, but it wasn't like that kind of a choice where if it won't be, I mean, you can still keep the 2 times with the 96, just so.
Well, obviously that affects the cost.
Right.
Yeah, then we need to look at it with the RFP with 1 versus 2 days.
There's also multiple options if you do go to a 1 day a week where you can have additional bags or capacity for additional trash if you have more than will fit in your cart for that particular pickup.
Well, I saw the question about number of bags, but I didn't see anything about frequency of pickup. Is that in there?
I'm not talking specific to the survey. I'm saying if we were to go to a 1 time a week pickup service, there's different options out there. Some cities have options where you can purchase bags for $1 or $2 and add those to that particular pickup. I'm not saying that's an option we go with. I'm just saying there's different options to deal with decreasing the frequency from 2 times a week to 1 time a week. And we can look at the cost implications of that and then the other options for taking care of folks that have more than will fit in the 96 gallon on any particular 1 time a week pickup situation.
I'd like to see it stay at 2 times a week on there. I mean, if you happen to be out away from home on the day it's supposed to be picked up, it means you're going to have it for 2 weeks before you ever get to.
Right, right. And if you have 17 kids, you're going to have a lot more garbage, obviously.
Why did you pick 17? I appreciate what Member Carbone said. The KPB is a different entity, but there are times where you can get not cost savings, but where sometimes you can sell like the used oil and stuff like that on for fuels blending and recycling. There are companies at times that could and will buy that at pennies on the dollar. So that is some small source of revenue. And if this was included in, then I would suspect that there would be some kind of reimbursement back from KPB on this. But to get the best value overall for this contract, I think it would all have to be included. And most companies nowadays do include that, especially for a municipality our size. They anticipate having some type of a recycle center to have to deal with. So,
I would say with respect to the recycle center and KPB, they're just knowing conversations they're having at the state level that are dovetailed into what the conversations they're having at the national level. The recycling centers are going to have to be governmentally subsidized. Organizations like KPB, there's just no way where we can have those without subsidizing. There's just not. I don't think that there's an example of one of them being self-funded. We can certainly discuss whether we want it funded out of this fund or not, but we're going to have to put money into those organizations in order to be able to offer that service. And I know our citizens would have expressed a desire to continue to have that. I'm in no way in favor of us going to 1 day a week. I don't think it's worth pricing because I don't get the impression it's going to be supported at all. With respect to the contract, I'd like to see if there's a possibility of moving the contract initiation date. I know that I'm oversimplifying what that means, but if it gets to, if we adopt it in December, if there's a possibility, with respect to terminating other contracts and the penalty associated with it.
Just to be clear, I was going to mention that there is no termination. The contract expires at the end of 21. We didn't take that renewal. So we're in good shape and for gearing up and everything else like that, but the contract expires at the end of 21.
Yeah. If we adopt it in December of this year, is there a way that we can get the cans online sooner than that? Or would it require that much time to be able to implement?
Well, you got to give a chance for anybody to implement. So, I mean, to get the hardware and everything else like that, that's what we need to gear it up.
So that time frame is feedback from potential vendors or from consultants?
Realistically, I think the consultant drove that. So.
Okay.
Yeah, last time we had a hard time finding a location to put all the cans before we sent them out. One thing I think, Councilmember Perez, you mentioned, which I don't really agree with, of where.
That's not uncommon.
No, that's not uncommon. But telling them where to deliver the waste. I know why you're talking about that, or mention it probably, but yet and still, the haul is probably as costly as picking it up. If you take it up to North Houston and let them get it, and you take a truck up there to dump it, you're going to pay a lot more money for the haul, just like you would anything else on there to do that. But I don't know if it's up to us to say you can only take it at not certain locations. I don't know.
I think last time we discussed this, it was about $100,000 more to do that. So I don't know. I don't know that I'm really in favor of doing that. That's just an additional cost more trucks to be on the road and, trying to get the trash delivered somewhere else other than local.
It was far more costly than 100,000, and I don't think that it's necessarily something that we need to mandate, but I do think it's a question we need to ask and look at what the implications are, because we have had a substantial amount of our citizens that have requested that we be able to make that choice in response to the issues that they've been having. So I think we don't have to adopt it, but I think it's worth us at least exploring that as an option in the contract and see what the impacts are.
Yeah, you could put it on there as an option, and they could tell you how much, to go to another location instead of 5 miles, go 15, 20 miles to another location, and what that cost is, and the truck being on the road for a period of time, and what have you. I mean, that don't have to go in the overall low bid, but it could be an option number out there. But kind of like Gary was talking about, it was a fairly substantial number when you overlooking over all of it.
So we could have that contract have an adult for selection of dump locations, and we can have an adult for green waste, prioritizing green waste to be picked up separately, and then we can adopt the adults as we want.
Just to clarify back on KBB funding, I just want to be transparent. Right now, good luck figuring out that franchise fee and the contract with Waste Management and how all that is. I'd rather us pay what we're going to pay for the trash pickup, and if we decide to put a fee on the bottom of the bill to fund KPB, then so be it. But at least everybody can see that, hey, part of this is going to KPB. Because right now, you can't see that from the city side or from KPB side.
Yeah, I think that needs to be a cost breakout so that it is transparent, so that you do see that. And we're fortunate to be a city our size that actually has a recycle center like what we have. There's a lot of places that don't have it, and you're paying a fee to actually have to go there to get rid of anything. So it is a huge benefit to the residents. And I do agree that that would be a nice breakout to have that on the bill to show that, what you are paying to utilize that facility.
So that's a big one, and appreciate it. I don't know if my colleagues have any, it gives us some parameters, I think, and some ideas, and we'll look at the schedule for bringing that forward so that we're in a position when this expires, we're ready to roll. So, just forging ahead here. Let me see, where are my notes? Yeah. The next topic in the next tab now is on our safe community categories. This is, excuse me, background on our fire services planning, staffing, utilization. We engaged Citygate several years ago, and that's really been our touchstone for decisions and moving forward on various aspects of our operations in the fire services. And in this paper, we outlined the hardware with the ladder trucks, the stations, and then the continuous onboarding. And this paper outlines all that. We would target bringing into the base budget to continue that so that we're not getting behind, and we continue our service levels where we want them to be. And so that's all described in this paper, and ask for any feedback or consensus towards continuing that so long as budgets allow and so forth.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I mean, with that study, we've been fairly aggressive with the onboarding, getting the new stations and the new equipment and apparatus online. I guess my thoughts and looking at response times is, once we get some of the additional roads built out, specifically McCard, how is that going to change response times? And then also, in terms of other, let's say, more outside the box, I know we've looked at doing a smaller vehicle, so we're not rolling $1 million truck to to instances where we don't have to. I'd still be in favor of looking at that. And I know historically the fire service hates that, but you look at rolling a $60,000 SUV with two guys versus $1 million truck, and they're able to get through traffic and get there and clear alarms quicker. And then also, I mean, there's some new technology things coming out there in terms of more of a community-based response. I don't remember the name of it, but I know that there's some cities that are implementing that.
Community-based medicine.
No, it's an app that you register for if you're certified in CPR. And I call 911, and my next door neighbor is fully trained, maybe a RN, that it pushes an alert out to them, says, hey, if you want to walk next door, you might save his life, something like that. And then it also puts all the AEDs that are in the city, kind of maps them out. So anyway, just to get a higher level of service without a huge budgetary impact. I'll find that and send that over.
That'd be helpful. I've seen that. It's always good. And obviously those aren't, I'm not saying you're saying this, but those aren't substitutes for all this, but it does, you need all the lines of defense that you can handle for this. On the vehicle rollouts, we need to get to the point where we have options and flexibility, particularly on the Station 5 service area. There's just that area is running, I don't want to say nonstop, but continually. And so when Station 8 comes on, we'll be in a better position to maybe even update the study or look at that and get some data after a year. 288 gets cleaned up, et cetera, et cetera. It'll be interesting and hopefully, I would assume positive once we have all that data in after maybe a year after that.
Yeah, and I think that's a good way to put it. I mean, the city gate, when they did the study, the city looked a lot different. And so once we get these new stations online, I think most of the time I'm not in favor of bringing consultants in, but I think it may be worth our while to bring them back in to kind of refresh it, and especially with the new ESDs and our ETJ, and there's been a lot of changes. And the app I was referring to is Pulse Point.
Another comment or question on that?
The only thing I have on here that when we come in with fire station number 8, and we're looking at 30 new personnel on there, or 30 personnel to go in, is that going to be some of the positions? Is it some that are at existing stations now?
No.
That could be promoted up to one of those and a junior come in, or what?
I mean, that's a bigger, different question. I mean, we need 30 new positions, and then everybody, adjusts. There's officers that come in from existing to move up to that, and then we hire people underneath to fill that up. So it's not like a lifetime assignment where you get into a station. So
yeah,
they adjust that. We have promotional ceremonies, programs for. And that's one of the great things about our department. We're at a size and scale now that it offers up those opportunities, and maybe we'll get to the point where we have some externals on top of that, but to this point, it's been mostly people rising to the top, moving up.
Okay, one other one that was listed in here is in the training side, and you're asking for assistant chief of training. Does it have to be an assistant chief at a high level?
That was the original recommendation. We've actually, with retirement in the department, staff took a look at that, and they've actually moved to a 2 assistant chief format. So that's what the staffing paper that's at your tables that I ask you to add in your notebooks for reference, because we just left a placeholder for the fire. That's based upon that new configuration with the 2 assistant chiefs.
Okay, and overall, when we're looking at bringing on 8 and fire station number 7, I guess it is, we're looking at a total of 42 personnel.
Oh, good job.
And that could be, I guess, as it's listed here, relief personnel, that's sick,
Good word.
time and stuff like that, in order to come in and be able to have the number of people that we need to staff on any given day. So is that what we're looking at?
Yeah, whatever it says in there, that's the planning now.
Okay.
So, I know, is Chief here? The hazardous materials response, are we to that level yet that we really need a response team for hazardous materials? I'm just asking.
Yeah, a
'Cause-
good question, and that came up in some other context. Can't remember, Vance, Chief, make sure that the answer was no, that we didn't see that as like a near term. Am I correct or wrong about that, Vance?
No, there's no need for us to have our own dedicated hazardous materials team.
Is there, so we would just call in support from a surrounding area, probably Houston?
Yes, our primary hazmat team comes from the Harris County Fire Marshal's office. If they're not available, we call the Houston Fire Department.
Okay, thank you. I was just wondering because it shows not started and I didn't think that we kind of really were there yet, but.
If I can clarify that, that's the training our members to do some basic hazardous materials response before the hazmat technical team gets there. That's what we haven't started yet.
Yeah, sure.
Kind of on a long-term strategy, I'm supportive of us doing the continuing onboarding as we had already outlined. I don't want to change direction on that. Right now, we're looking at 8 coming online next year, 4 getting remodeled, and 7 coming online probably within the next 2 years. Chief Riley, I'm positive you've told me this before, and I apologize for if I've forgotten, but do you have an idea of what we estimate our response time to be down to once 7 comes on?
Once we add the additional units to Station 2 and 3 and staff Station 7, we believe we'll be very close to that target of 7 minutes and 30 seconds, 90% of the time.
Okay, so long term, do we think 7? We'll get 7 online, and then we'll kind of hold pat, see what our response time is, and then see if there's additional stations that need to be built and need to be staffed, or we would be looking at additional expansion beyond 7 coming online.
I believe the next area would be the development of the Massey Oaks area, and that will probably require another fire station there. And then if there's anything that's round out by the airport that's ever in the city, that would be another station out there.
We wouldn't be considering stations out in our the ESDs that are.
Not at this time.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
All right, the next one's something we've kind of got excited about, and that's initiation of our own Pearland Police Academy. The paper describes the advantages of that. We would be allowed better scheduling, more control of the training regimen, wouldn't be subject to availability from other agencies. It's worked well for us. I don't want to say it's not a viable option to continue as is, but this would really help move us forward, especially as we're at a stage and a scale where we're going to be constantly, adding, bringing people on, talent. So we've got great internal staff that provide a lot of training, and actually kind of excited about this. So I think in the paper we kind of described that the vision is that once we replace Station 4, which Fire Station 4 on Freedom Drive there, that was built as when the department was volunteer, vastly different than it is now. Replace that next door with a new purpose-built dedicated Station 4 that we could very nicely rehab the existing building and make that into a nice training building, physical, not therapy, training options that would dual purpose there. And so, that's one piece of it. But really, we could start with some more effort and attention, our own academy, regardless in our existing public safety building. But we'd want to have an eye towards moving into that renovation and a purpose-built building soon thereafter. I've toured a similar facility over in Fort Bend with our team, and really think this holds a lot of advantages for us. I don't want to overplay this at all, but like we're doing for going to other departments, we could start to host some other agencies at a point near term, help diversify that and offset some of the costs of that. So we've gotten conversations with TCOLS, which is the state agency that regulates that. It's got a letter of support. And so we'd like to just bring some attention and acknowledgement of that as we look to move forward in that.
I've got a question. We're talking about opening a police academy here in Pearland, but the white paper says we provided over 18,000 hours of training, and about half of that was for personnel outside of Pearland. What's the difference in that and an academy that we're proposing?
So the academy be for the new recruits to bring that on? I think that number, the larger number, is inclusive of all continuous education, bringing people up. Correct me if I'm wrong, Chief, on that?
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's actually officers that are already certified. They just come here for additional training or recertifications.
So, people, new techniques and new methods, et cetera, we're always trying to keep our people up, and that's why we send them to different agencies. That's going to continue regardless. But maybe we can even host some of that if we had some larger spaces here ourselves.
We actually hosted over 90 different agencies last year. And our officers here actually go to other academies and teach. So them actually teaching our own academy would not be that big of a jump.
If we did go forward with the academy, how much of the cost would be absorbed through training outside personnel, and how much of it would have to be absorbed by the city? I realize some of it would be offset by the amount of money we, I guess, spend at academies to train our police officers now.
So most of it is going to be trained by our staff here already. There are a couple of classes that we would have to outsource. Not looking at that costing us very much. And that's pretty much it. And we're going to start out really small. We're not going to start out with a class of 25 or 30 the first year. So we'll start out with probably a very small class and just kind of work at it from there. And like Mr. Pearson said, start inviting other agencies. Already had some conversations with some smaller agencies and chiefs who would like to send their people over here for training.
Thank you, Chief.
In reviewing the white paper, I'm in favor of it. Doesn't seem like it's a large, if material impact to the budget. I like the idea of keeping our staff here in the city. That way we're not paying for travel, mileage, any of that. And also, if there is ever a large event that needs a lot of hands, at least they're here. And I never mind seeing the extra police cars from anywhere else in the city when there's a big training going on. And I'd rather them all be in our city than us going somewhere else.
Sorry, go
I was
ahead.
going to say this was a subject discussed at the Houston Galveston Area Council Board meeting, and recognizing that the population is going to be expanding rather rapidly over the next 20 years, that they would like for the quality and highly recognized departments to step forward and make their contribution. We're doing that right now, so I think it's a function that could be handled, and I think the funding that Houston Galveston Area Council has, in most cases, have contributed funding to support that. So I'd like to see our quality people share of what we know with the other departments around. Our citizens travel to other departments, areas, footprints in this area, so we want to make sure everybody's well trained.
I believe y'all answered part of my questions, but with regard to us potentially providing this service opportunity to other agencies as well, I just wanted to maybe throw in there that because we do have these smaller communities surrounding us that are going to be experiencing very rapid growth in the near future, that we don't overlook the opportunity to work with them in planning this, and also kind of looking over the training and classroom building paragraph here. I was just wondering that if we do build out that, build the capacity to do the training in-house and even train other agencies, that we also take into account potential future expansion, so that, that's something that I think is going to affect this region in particular in the very, very near future. And if we can become that premier agency and offer training and help offset some costs through participation in neighboring communities, I think that's worth considering. Thank you.
No, I'm 100% in favor of this. It's always good to be able to, have, the classroom right there in your backyard to do what you got to do instead of having to travel and have all those expenses and have to take time off to do that stuff. So I'm 100% in favor of doing the training center. Um, I'm excited to think that it maybe can grow from where it is and we end up being one of the premier training facilities around. That would be awesome to be. So 100% in favor of doing this.
Also in favor, just want to, this may be a little premature, but just see if we can reach out to Alvin and Manville as they grow. They're going to need new police officers. If we can get some sort of agreement with them to help train at our facility, since they're contiguous with us, if there's some consistent policing strategies between them and us, I think that only serves to benefit us. Obviously we're not going to get enough money from them to be able to offset all the costs, but I'd really like to see if we can have some agreement in place for us to kind of work as a tandem.
I just got a quick comment. I went to one of the swearing-in ceremonies for 5 of our police officers, and any of you haven't been, it's pretty impressive. Out of 5, I think there were 3 male, 2 female. They're all college graduates, all had graduated in the top 5 of their class, and 2 of them were number 1 and number 2 in the academy. So we've got some fine officers out there. So if you get an opportunity, go see one of these.
I didn't anticipate there'd be headaches with, bringing this forward. Just want to get some eyes on that and, give credit to the team for moving on this. And echo what Member Lettle just said, every time we bring people on, it's very competitive. We're able to attract great talent and it's impressive always, and including from other agencies. Seems like every time we're getting people that come over to us, and I think that's a testament to the staff and leadership here. The next one under tab 3 is sustainable infrastructure, and this has been a gap in our budgeting and our investments, and that's just our regular reinvestment in the streets and sidewalks. It's a big enough number, and we don't have many of those where there's some flexibility that this is where we go each year and balancing the budget, as council's aware, and we just show you there the numbers in terms of streets and sidewalks, what we've been doing. There is a part of this equation of what is allocated. We need to make sure that we get out and deploy, and we've made considerable steps towards that, and working with Brazoria County, for instance, and partnering with them. But whatever we have, we need to make the best use of, and so this tab this paper just explains that history and that background, and what in the best of all worlds, to maintain the existing pavement index, we'd be looking at $5 million annual spend in this category. So we're a fraction of that right now.
Anybody got any comments on that?
Mayor, I've inquired before, and I don't know if we've had any movement. Can we look into some sort of matching or partnership with neighborhoods or HOAs? So if, say, Green Tea wanted to get all their sidewalks replaced, and if they were willing to foot part of the bill, that would make our tax dollars stretch further, kind of like the state and Fed does with us.
I don't know if we've formally done that, because not yet. So we'll look at some programs or models if they're out there. I assume they are, and go for that.
Yeah.
Or at least bring us the information.
Yeah.
You picked the wrong area.
Yeah.
To be honest with you, I mean, we only charge $130 a year for the HOA, and it's volunteer, so you only have about 52% that's paying it.
Well, you can wait. The other question on page 5, it talks about the fiscal year 20 program sidewalk work, and it shows 11,000 feet of sidewalk replaced for $200K, and then 14,000 feet of sidewalk with mud raising that costs $330K. those numbers right? I assume that that mud raising was much cheaper.
I wouldn't say that the mud raising is definitely cheaper than a full replacement, but again, we can get a little bit more done. The thing we were running into in the past was we would go in and be ripping out entire neighborhoods and blowing through the budget when it wasn't necessary, when there was only sections. So now we're trying to identify the bad sections and raising those if they can be raised. We actually have a draft policy that we're working on to determine how we decide that, how many inches that it sank, if it's causing ADA problems, things like that. And then we'll address the entire group. We'll address it, but only replace what's needed or raise it if it can be raised. I hope that answered your questions. It sounded quite rambling to me.
Yeah, it did. I guess I was looking at the cost to replace the sidewalk is $18 a foot versus the mud jacking of, what was it, 23? I think the numbers are off.
Yeah.
I hope they're off.
We can look at that.
Yeah, because you're mud jacking, all it is boring a hole into the concrete and pumping it underneath to raise it up. But I've noticed something, I didn't see it in this when we were looking at it. At some of the areas where you got your sidewalks come together at the expansion joints, we're paying somebody to go out and grind them down so they'd be level. Is that what we're doing, Clarence?
No, sir, not to my knowledge. That should not be happening. We're either replacing or we raise it to match the adjoining section.
On the other end, you'll see the sidewalk. What they've come in and done is get out there and grind it down at the expansion joint.
Yes, sir, that would be the slicing. I'm sorry, I wasn't thinking of it in that terms, but that would be the slicing. We're not doing as much of that as I would rather not do too much of that, but sometimes it's needed. But the elevating it or raising it works better, or outright replacing it. But we do have slicing going on. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I've noticed on some of the expansion joints is that coming in with some asphalt put there, cover up the expansion joint on some of them. But it will stop the people from walking in the street, I think, once they can walk on the sidewalks safely.
A couple of things. Clay, you and I brought this up with you in our one-on-one meeting recently, but if you could I just kind of express the sidewalk on Business Center Drive, getting that done. I think we're looking at TERS funding to do that, but I'd like to have that, make sure that that's incorporated in this budget year. Kind of been patient about it, but I really want to get that done. I'd also, again, invite the other members to join me or at least allow me to reintroduce the idea of taking the money that we charge the individual developers to build sidewalk in front of their property, particularly when it goes nowhere and it's not going anywhere anytime soon, when there's no development on either side or the redevelopment on either side, to allow us to give them an option of a payment in lieu of, similar to what we do with the Parks Fund, put that into a dedicated fund and use that to repair and replace sidewalk throughout the city where they're actually needed, as opposed to forcing developers to put them where no one's going to use them. If there's anybody that would support that, I'd love to introduce that discussion. And if we're gonna charge for that to be done, I'd rather make better use of it.
First time that came up, I was in support of it, still am. And I think I was told by staff that there's already an overlay on our GIS for the gaps. Is that correct? Or it's coming?
Right. When we brought that up, I mean, the developers, when they do the sidewalks, if there's something that's imminent, we take the money and apply it towards that. Yeah, we can't. And for those areas where there wouldn't be any for a long time, those are very, very, very few and far between. But and the city then would be responsible for that at that future point. But we can share that again, the background information. But it's in the scheme of this whole topic, it's they need to go in where they need to go, and they put in the contribution. It's either going to be by our forces, like on Broadway with a contract, or we'll get them done the other ways with our own forces.
I know we looked at the past. I mean, I would not to debate it. I didn't necessarily agree with the arguments that were made at the time, nor would I now. But I think it's something. If council is settled and they don't want to explore this anymore, but I do want to continue to bring it up because our sidewalk is underfunded. That's we are essentially taxing people to spend money on sidewalk, ostensibly where we do not need it. So I'd like to be able to re-explore that idea if there's another council member who'd like to join me on that. Again, a future discussion, but I think it's still worthy of exploring.
On the 6 options, one thing that I would like to know is, as the PCI goes down, what the long-term increase would be in the maintenance cost if we allow it to go down. I don't know if we have that already. If we don't, I'd just like to see what that would be.
We can see if we can quantify that. It might be a little tough, but
Okay. Well, it would just help to know. I mean, it seems really tough to do option 1, obviously. But if we do drop down to, let's say from 72 down to 67, what that increase in kind of that deferred maintenance cost and stuff would be. So I'm just curious if it's possible to quantify that.
So that's streets and sidewalks. And next up, this more of a background paper on some of our, call it, smart cities, just as a general term, using technology to improve services and efficiency. Several council members had the opportunity. We toured the Hill House traffic operations and saw that side of things and how they're progressing, at least the plans for that. Really comes down to having a communications network. But this really gets down to, even in terms of our back of the house operations, SCADA in terms of our water and sewer system, traffic signals, mobile data terminals for police and fire, cameras, positioning, fleet management, all those kinds of things. So, it's a long play. It's always changing field in terms of what's available, and technology is changing and trying to stay on top of that. But this paper attempts to describe some of the background of that. I don't know if there's any comments. It's more of a primer on where we're at and where we're going on that.
I appreciate what we're spending on the technology side for traffic. I mean, that's consistently one of the #1 issues with citizens. But as we then slide into augmented reality, I think that, that's cool. Everybody likes new technology, but that doesn't need to be in the budget. Period.
Actually, I think that's talking about, it does have a place in terms of, and you've seen, we can share some of the articles, but when you're out in the field.
I get that. And I mean, you quote, United Nations and all this global United Nation projections and Navigant research. I get that, but I don't know that that's where we are right now in Pearland.
I'll just say the last point on there, #2 on the augmented reality, that's talking about underground utilities and being able to see those. That's what that's about.
Yeah.
So
that's cool. I get
very
it.
real.
It's real. I don't know that we need to be spending it right now.
Okay.
And I mean, that was the question. Is there consensus on supporting future initiatives? And I'm not supportive of augmented reality or anything close to it.
I guess before we kill it, can we discuss exactly what that means? I mean, I think it's staff wearing VR equipment.
Trent's got that. I mean, we're talking about avoiding hitting utilities and conflicts and so forth. So
I'll take that and then maybe see if Dan has any follow-ups. But it's using our existing GIS data and information, and then just really putting that into the field, where you can, take your phone or iPad and take a look at where you are and project that GIS data in the real world as to where valves, water lines, all of our underground infrastructure that we have to go out and locate on a daily basis because of other entities going in and putting underground infrastructure, the phone companies, the cable companies. So, Dan, anything else on that?
I think Trent pretty much covered it, right? It's all about using the technology we already have, using the data we already have, and being able to present it out to field personnel. So they're not digging up areas that they shouldn't be digging up. They know exactly where our services are in the ground.
I'll say, I mean, this is something that's now available on everybody's cell phone. I mean, it's integrated in Google Maps now. I mean, it's available with so many different technologies. I don't think it's going to be something that's going to maybe cost a great deal of money. I think the technology is already there, and it can only help, I think, and it's shown, I think, consistently. I use it on a regular basis. Even just walking around town, you just hold your phone up and you can see things that the existing data is there, but it's presented in a way that I think is more helpful and more easily translated. I think it's going to be a cost saving in time, especially, as well as potential, missteps and accessing utilities and stuff.
I mean, that's cool. And I mean, you look at the explosion of the IT budget, and historically it's been because we haven't upgraded our systems in 10 or 15 or 20 years. And we made that expenditure, and I get that. But this is going farther. So when we're talking about constraints and talking public safety, how we merge that with our discussion on the effective tax rate, this is a cool thing. If it's free, go for it. If there's a price tag associated with it, I would like to see those dollars better allocated somewhere else.
I don't disagree with that. I just don't want to shut the door on the idea. I mean, when we say it augmented reality, it sounds like we're asking for a ridiculous thing. And I can tell you, at least in my field, if we had 3D models, which we could go to and say, I know the water line is not 4 foot deep here, it's actually 6 foot deep here, as opposed to just seeing the 2D models. If you go to other cities, some of our neighboring cities, they don't even have the 2D model, so it's a wild guess. It would save us, it would save us long term. If there's some ability to say, programmatically, we can move in that direction at some point. We're not expending now, but as we adopt new systems, as we improve our GIS, as we upgrade our GIS, if there's some systems that can get integrated for a relatively small cost that would allow us to do that, I would like us to at least be able to explore those ideas when it comes into play. And then once we get an infrastructure built, as we do now, we can ask the developers as they add on to our infrastructure to help improve the model, so they're helping us maintain it. So I agree with you. It's not something we're prepared to do now. It's absolutely a want, not a need. But I would like for us to be able to, our staff to be able to keep an eye on that in the future, because it would eventually benefit us.
Okay. Just the fear I have is we sit up here, we say it's all great. It gets buried in the budget somewhere. Our effective tax rate includes some of this stuff that we can't see in the granularity of the budget. And then we say, hey, if you go the rollback, you can actually give a few more PD spots or fire, or we can't do the raises because all that stuff's buried down the budget. But if you want to raise to 2%, then you have to go the effective tax, the rollback tax rate. And we've seen it time and time again, and that stuff's going to get buried in there if we don't make kind of clear statements now. And as staff deserves direction. And I may be the odd man out, but in list of priorities, it's very low.
No, and that's, in my opinion, that's kind of where we're at right now, is that we really need to, figure out what the priorities that we want to do and, cut everything else, because, we'll get into staffing here later on, and, that's going to be the, in my opinion, a really big part of this section is the staffing piece. So I agree. I mean, all this little stuff is going to add up, and adding all this little stuff up is going to keep us from having money to do some of those staffing issues, to solve some of those staffing issues and other things we need to do. So yeah, I agree.
Do we have any idea what this cost?
Again, this is this particular element, that item is, as was referenced, it's not a one thing. There's pieces of software. We're out there all the time, and as Trent said, it's trying to make the people that are out there have the tool technology to do their job more quickly. So there's no dollar. It's not like a buy a one piece thing. So
yeah, these things are amazing. I just know more about augmented reality than I ever cared to. But there's got to be a cost associated with it. I mean, how many feet of sidewalk could we build? I'm sure if you ask citizens, would you rather have some Star Wars technology on our phones or
reacting. That's your phone reacting.
I think that was on purpose.
I don't know if it's Star Wars or, as Member Hernandez says, just using maps and technology that's out there. But
And that was
we're
gonna be-
happy to provide some background on that.
I'd like to see the cost of it.
To your broader point, you're right, Member Carbone. It does get very granularly. Our job is to read through the material and make sure that we can get through the granulation, so that we know what we're spending on. And I don't want to prioritize it. I just don't want to give staff an idea that that's not a direction we would ever want to go. We're not talking about everybody sitting around their office and playing Pokemon Go. We're talking about building a system that could help us the preventive maintenance side, which theoretically, I stress the word theoretically, could save us money long term. So if there's a switch that we could, a relatively low value switch that we could, or a funding mechanism that we could do, I don't want to discourage them from, because we made augmented reality a 4-letter term, but it's definitely not a priority right now. I would say systems like that, at least my direction, would be systems like that should probably not be a priority at all until we get, if we adopt an instruction to go under 50% on the debt rate. All of those things kind of get trivialized until we hit that metric. That's the guidance. And then once we hit that metric, then we start adopting those things that we really wanted. We start getting we're taking care of the needs, then we can start getting to the wants. So it's all part of the broader conversation.
I would agree with that. I think, I don't know that it's necessarily a priority now, but I do think not just in terms of how it would benefit staff as a tool, but also how it would benefit the residents. I mean, if we're causing delays and things because of missteps and we can prevent those in the future, obviously that's going to be a great benefit to the residents. And I mean, that's something that hopefully I see coming out of a tool like this, once we do get the costs hammered down and we can see, how it actually benefits the community.
I guess, Tony, that, well, city manager says we're not voting today on the budget. So, as we get down to here, and I think, you're right. We need to come in with some kind of each one of the departments and line item cost up or down of what it is, and try to get to either the effective rate or rollback rate or whatever it is. But we're going to have a lot more discussion, a lot more information within each one of these departments, and expect the director of the departments that buys into the budget one way or the other, up or down. But this gave us some good information to start with, but still getting to the point of the overall dollar within the budget and the taxpayer on it. I'd like to see more go into the Department of Public Works. That's where the people that pay the tax. So, but as we get down through this, I think, we're going to take this information, but there's going to be a lot more information that we're going to be needing to do. And you're right. I mean,
So tab 4 is, again, a lot of background information, just some of the things that we're keeping our eyes on in terms of larger picture and the environment of that affects the economy and brings down the city revenues and expenditures. For instance, we have a chart there of licenses and permits. We try to show there the trend year over year, but then how that breaks when we make the estimates and how we budget conservatively from that point forward. On page 5 of that section, the growth and then the moderation in licenses and permits. And then if I could ask you to, look especially at page 9, that shows the different revaluations as we mature as a city. It's very important in terms of keeping an eye on that. It's a good thing when values are maintained, and this shows the distribution by the various appraisal districts and how that increases. It was more moderate growth in the existing valuation last year compared to some prior years, and so those are all things that drive the different levers of our budget. And then there's some larger picture information, employment-wise, and permits from Greater Houston Partnership, and then our own community development team, one of their quarterly reports. So if there's anything anybody like to highlight, but that's really for your background edification and use.
On page 5, that that chart shows a decrease from fiscal year 16 all the way to 20.
I'm sorry, which page?
Page 5,
5, yep.
the license and permit revenue.
Yep.
At the same time that revenue's dropped, we've increased those fees, I think, in what, 16 and 18? So I guess that's just, it's surprising to see that drop as fees have increased. Is there a way to look at that in terms of number of I guess, sheer number absent the change in rate?
I thought there was something in here with the single family. We can throw that out. I thought there was something in permits quantity, but we can take a look at that.
And then does that, I'm sure when we get to staffing, we're going to want to add more license and permit staff. And how does that correspond to a decrease in traffic? And we can save that till later.
Yeah. So on that chart on table 5, where it says fiscal year, it looks like there's, so those numbers of building permits, single family?
That's all of it. So the,
permits?
but if you look in the quarterly report from Mr. McDonald's group on page 45, shows the single family detached residential construction, so you can see the actual numbers of the permits, which I believe is what you're getting at.
And I think you'd find that those two would be highly correlated. If you look at our single-family chart, it would follow almost the same curve of those bar charts.
So just in case anybody at home was reading the white paper, so they don't freak out, I think there's a typo from the GHP quote, projecting the drop from 64,000 jobs in the Houston Metro to 2,000 jobs in 2020. I think it should be 42. So just to put that out there so people don't freak out.
Yes.
Okay.
I think it's just, it's important for us to continue to keep these updates in so we can long-term strategize what we're doing with our budget in anticipation of what the economy is doing as best we can. So thank you for including this. It's very useful.
I think it's been some good step in our 2021 budget process. And Clay, did you have other wrap-up comments to this?
Not on these papers. That's all very good. There is, if you're willing, Mayor, we could move into the just the staffing considerations. That's the next tab section, or just keep forging ahead. I think we're in good shape. So.
Okay, good.
So there is the, and these are good documents for a starting point in our staffing needs, and just these are somewhat raw from the departments in terms of what they see as gaps and opportunities and needs. There's various rationale in terms of workloads and indicators that get to those points. But these are unfettered with realities of budgets or any other economies or decisions on that. So they come to different degrees depending upon the department size. There is a summary on page 4 that sort of shows that, and again, reality check will come unless member Owens wants to vote on the budget today. We've got to figure this out between now and next August when we bring this to you. No. But I mean, I don't know, however council would wish to proceed. I mean, I don't know if there's sections that people want to jump into or areas that they see or questions that we can answer that would help us. And, down the road when we're bringing this to you, if there is any topics or questions that people had about, ferreting out some of the information that's in here, so. Oh, I apologize, as long as, and on page 5, I could see when we bring the budget, some kind of a variation of this in packaging together some areas so that we don't, don't focus too exclusively on one area and totally neglect another, where we say for the same amount of money, here's, how we would suggest divvying up the new positions as a package, if you would. So that gives you a flavor for, sort of the thinking towards, if you add police and firefighters, there's a corresponding at some point need to address and bring on administrative staff to support that so that they're effective and safe and trained and all those kinds of things. So the idea would be to, and field personnel and public works, all that, we might not otherwise give as much attention to. So, those packages on page 5 and 6, I could see coming to you in the budget recommendation with something along those lines.
On some of the, for the fire departments, I know we use a large number of part-time, but looking at the staffing over a period of time, is that going to reduce the number of part-time people?
Vance can quantify it. Actually, we use part-time in fire, primarily City of Houston, full-time folks that are working here as a supplement for gap when we have scheduling challenges and so forth and to fill in. It's not actually now a huge piece, but if Vance wants to quantify that for me.
Yes, over time, through attrition, our number of part-time employees has been decreasing. As the department has grown, it's become difficult to manage everybody's schedules and trying to get them work. So we are not, we're keeping the folks we have now, but we're not actively trying to build that program.
It's a big challenge in trying to schedule, as Vance said, just to get the right people and, find them trained up and, slotting them in. You just can't bring anybody, as you know, off the street and off another department. You got to have some context for that working with us.
What we're looking at here on this page 4 through there on the citywide staffing on a 3-year outlook, looking at a total of 140.5 over a 3-year period.
I qualified that. That's if you total up everything, that's what the number would be. Yeah.
All right.
For me, I think I would like to emphasize our staffing on in the finance department, particularly for the reasons I discussed before. I'd also again, for continuous onboarding and the police department additions, we've prioritized that. I think that's certainly something that we need to do continuously. But I think the finance, probably more on the engineering side. Not to say that I'm biased, but I am more on the engineering capital project side. I know we could use more staffing. One question with respect to the summary, and I apologize if I missed this somewhere in the write-up. On community development, we show a loss in 18. A net loss. Can you explain the net loss and where why we've not replaced that position?
We had a senior planner position that was originally included in the budget for that year, which was due to budget constraints removed, but we did reallocate positions within the department to meet that need without creating a new FTE.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, for me, I would be really interested in looking at providing some more police officers for maybe another DDAX squad, but I for sure think that we need to have an employee to serve as a property room clerk and somebody to burn disc. I know there's some officers that are spending a lot of time burning disc, and we don't need them burning disc. We need them out, doing their job, what they're trained to do. And it takes a lot of time for them to sit there and burn these discs for, for evidence on things. So I would love to see us have a property room clerk, kind of admin assistant for the CID unit to put some of those officers back to doing the things that they do best instead of sitting behind a computer burning disc.
Even better would be if the county stepped up on their technology so we didn't do disc burning at all.
Yeah, that too. But till then.
You feel like you have enough direction?
Yeah, again, this is a good reference, and when we have budget requests, we always reference back and said, does it match up with at least what you asked? And the staffing studies. So we try to enforce some discipline there with planning and consistency. And this does give us a roadmap for future operations and growth and all that. So
Under package 3, can you just explain to me the recurring costs of the maintenance crew?
Page 3?
Yes, the package 3. Sorry.
Package 3. So I think that was Parks and Public Works field. Is that what just kind of generic positions for maintenance crews?
Well, specifically, I'm just trying to figure out how the recurring costs.
Recurring costs. At 11,197?
Yeah.
Probably the fuel and the supplies for them to tools, miscellaneous. When we do capital improvements, we try to identify those kinds of things, so we recognize that and build that into our operating budget. So I assume that's what that's doing. John?
I'm sorry. Can you repeat the question?
No. Page 6, package 3. There's 11,197 for recurring there. Maintenance crews.
Yeah.
I think my answer is 99% right. So if it's wrong, we'll send you back.
We'll get that point.
That's a typo, yes.
It's a typo?
Or that.
Should be 110,000.
Yeah, so that recurring cost is significantly more by about 100,000. So instead of 744, it should be 844?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, because I mean, I was looking at the recurring cost for each one of the packages, and that just seemed blatantly off. Yeah, okay. Thank you.
So I thought you're trying to get at what was recurring cost versus the amount of that.
Yeah, I keep looking at, because I'm thinking ahead, not just looking at the 21 cost in that budget, but thinking, this recurring cost is going to keep growing. Obviously, we have to do the COLAs and stuff like that, and that's the number that I focus on.
Yep.
So that, I just, some of these small differences between, the 31 and the 41 to be allocated to other supplemental requests, I'm just not as focused on that number as I am the recurring cost number, just kind of projecting forward. So with that, I mean, I think the difference between 1.4 and 844,000 in recurring cost just so significant. I'm kind of maybe leaning, I think package 4 is maybe too lean. But package 3 may be something I could at least get behind for now, so we can kind of get as close to the effective rate numbers as we can, and then if we can build it out from there. But I guess to go ahead and update that number from 744 to 844.
In looking at your staffing request or projections for 2021, top of page 5, you mentioned that there's only 950,000 available, and the different scenarios you give for the police and fire, the first two, which are I think the realistic ones, use up most of that money. When you say there's nothing left to fund the other ones, you talking about citywide or just the police and fire?
Out of the general fund, that's 950 in total. So as you said, package 1 and 2. The FY21 costs, just big round numbers, that 919 and the 909 would eat up all that at the rollback, yeah.
Right, so there's nothing to fund the other projected positions for the rest of the city, is that right?
In package 1, there'd be 1 manager somewhere else, and in package 2, there'd be 2 positions somewhere else, but that's it.
And these additional positions are not in the forecasted budget that we've got right now?
They're in that piece that's in the front. They're not in there, but that's the numbers that we'd be using.
Okay, so they're not included in the budget. So if we need the additional personnel, where are we going to get the funds to pay these people?
That'll be a budget discussion each year, so.
Would it be a budget increase item?
No, I mean, if you tell us that, like we said at the beginning, if we want to do at the rollback rate, that's what we'll bring you back, and we'll show you how we get to that and the pros and cons and how we get to that.
All right, so we'll see that in the next round.
You'll see that, yes.
All right, thank you.
Hernandez, in yours on reoccurring costs, when you look at that in the budget this year, we had positions come in at 3 months and 6 months. So this budget coming up, those positions hit at 100% instead of 3 months and 6 months. So that's your reoccurring cost coming in through that area.
Yeah. I mean, that's just going to add to it.
Yeah, I mean, that's
Yeah.
there. It's there.
That's why
It's
I'm
there.
saying
That's what was approved last year.
these differences are pretty substantial.
Yeah.
So
Just to be clear, the packages are built on a 12-month, and that the salary and benefits is for the 12 months and the recurring. And the multi-years, as we've mentioned, shows and anticipates and recognizes the full 12 months for each of those positions when we show you the multi-year at budget time.
I mean, and bear in mind, that's assuming we take the rollback, which we've already told staff that we're not, we don't seem to have the appetite for. So the 950 is not available, which means that the funding these positions is not available unless we cut the 950 from somewhere else. One thing I forgot to mention, just kind of in the future planning, I think everything on most of the documents seem pretty straightforward. The only thing I don't think I feel comfortable with is the horticulturalist coming into next year's fiscal year. I just don't see that as a priority for us, particularly when we're spending as much on landscaping through our contractor. But other than that, I didn't see anything else that jumped out at me.
And I will say that I'm as much to completely supportive of future staffing recommendations for communications. I think that department, especially now, needs all the support that they can get to back us up and make sure that the public stays informed and engaged. So,
In regards to communication and staffing, is there any availability of using the PEG funds for staffing, or is that just for capital?
Yeah, I think John knows that better than anybody, so.
It's all.
Thank you.
All right. If you have, this isn't a one-time thing. So again, if council, as you curl up this and review it, please do share observations and anything we can illuminate as we go forward. It's all to the good in terms of getting you the information you need and making sure we remain on the same page. The next item, Mayor, is review of the updates. And I don't know that we need to go over these, but they're there for your reference behind tab 7. And again, it's available online. And these are backgrounders on implementation of financial policy updates, success with the ESDs that staff's carried forward and from your policy decision, the topic of MUD rebates, and then really the value proposition of incorporation. That's ongoing discussion as we look in the larger picture of annexation, relationships with the county services and what have you. So I don't know if there's any questions or comments on any of that that we can highlight. All right.
Other comments we have at this point, just wrap-up comments?
Then, Mayor, next step, as we've done every year, we'll put together takeaways from this. If there were questions, we'll follow up and bring those back to you in Thursday packets and what have you. And then we'll continue to do the follow-ups and execute this as we go forward. Thank you for all your time and attention. It's been good as always. That's all. We'll rest. Thanks again to the
Pretty
staff.
well finish up our budget.
I have one
workshop.
wrap up. I'd like to see if we could get a white paper for possibly using any kind of PEDC funding to do any kind of infrastructure support. Just something that we could look at to try to see if PEDC can help contribute to some of these maybe fire stations that need to be built, and possibly the police fire station to be built, to allow for us to not increase debt to the general fund and possibly not increase debt to PEDC also. We could just get a white paper on some of that to council.
It'll be the context of what you can and can't do with economic development funds, and we'll be happy to share that out.
Thank you.
That pretty well complete your budget process at night.
We'll rest, sir. Thank you.
Okay, I'd like to make a final comment, and that is that I think it's important that we not only be aware that this budget is very important, but we need to watch it in the future because the Houston Galveston Area Council and the Census Department and others have projected that by 2045, the Houston metropolitan area will have 10.7 million people. That's another 4 million people coming in. We need to make sure that we're prepared for that expansion because we're going to get our fair share of the population. And as we grow, we need to continue doing exactly what we're doing today, and that is not only look at what we need next year, but what do we need 10 years or 15 years ahead. And I think our staff has been focused on that, and I think we need to recognize that what we're doing today is very, very important for what we look like in the future. So let me, at this point, adjourn this public hearing, strategic planning workshop, actually, at 10:30. Thank
AJ, well, how are you?
Hi, how you doing? Good to see you, man. Thank you, Zach. Yeah, I adjourned it at 10:30, so everybody else.
Yeah, that's right. Everybody reset your clock. Yeah, I'm sorry, I forgot to.